Our story begins on a clear and quite ordinary morning, but there was only one unusual thing that morning. Everything was empty, without people. Plates of food remained untouched on the tables, and even the main character's house is empty. His parents are not there, only he is in an empty apartment. But then something unusual happened. A blonde angel appeared in front of the guy. Our hero was very surprised and could not understand who it was in front of him. The girl, Angel, was called Lita. She was sent by God to the last man on earth. But John still didn't understand why he stayed. Had he fallen behind all the other people who had disappeared? It turned out that the earth had accumulated enough mana, and people went to learn how to control it. And John must cope with his own strength. The guy was shocked by this truth and didn't know how to live on. A lot of time passed, which John spent alone, without people, surrounded only by animals. But then people began to return to Earth. But along with them, terrible monsters in the form of predators appeared on the planet, attacking people. But suddenly a masked defender with a spear in his hand appeared in front of the pack of monsters. He struck down the first predator, which flew to the ground. The angry monsters rushed at the warrior. Their eyes were burning with malice. Their fangs were bared. But this pack also suffered a blow of unprecedented force. The animals flew off to the sides. The rescued people could not understand who their hero was, who protected them. No one could have imagined that there were such strong and brave people on Earth, capable of fighting back against monsters. But it was too early to relax. Warnings about danger were heard from all sides. Another batch of evil spirits was already flying towards the hero from behind. He entered into another fight. Blood flowed. The animals howled in pain. The masked defender of the people emerged victorious from the battle once again. He had no doubt in his own strength. Hundreds of years would not be enough for these monsters to defeat him. But let's go back to the beginning. Our hero is at a loss. He came to the university and it was empty. The classrooms are empty. Books and notebooks are scattered around. There is untouched lunch in the dining room. The corridors are empty and dark. And only the sun shines just as brightly. John decided to go back home, but the bus never showed up at the stop. He wants to believe that this is just some kind of dream. His house looks as usual. John enters the apartment. He looks for his parents, calls his mother, but there is only silence in response. And then the guy's gaze falls on the clock on the wall. It shows 14.45. A terrible guess dawns on John. He left for school at the same time. In a panic, he picks up the phone. It has the same time. John begins to frantically build logical chains. He was not home for 2 hours, but the sun shines in the same place. Has time really stopped? The guy is confused. He is alone in an empty apartment and time passes only for him. Suddenly a golden glow appears behind him. Flapping a wing, a golden slipper on the foot. And then a girl with blonde hair appeared in front of him. She wants to explain to John that time has stopped for everyone except him. The guy is surprised and scared. He can't understand what kind of creature it is. But the girl is in no hurry to reveal herself, giving the guy time to think. And he, in turn, not finding another explanation, thinks that she is a thief. This assumption offended the girl. After all, she has wings. Then John makes another guess, suggesting that her outfit is a parody of an angel costume. The guest's patience snaps. She introduces herself. This is Lita, God's messenger and angel. She is sent to Earth because John is the only one left on the planet. This information makes the guy even more confused. Terrible memories from school when he was forgotten on a field trip immediately came to his mind. Moreover, this happened more than once throughout my studies. And even at the university, they forgot about him, completing events without him. These memories finally broke John. He fell to his knees and cried, and Lita was amused by this. It turns out that everyone left Earth for another world, except John. The guy can't understand why this happened. The Earth is in danger, that's what Lita should have explained. The Earth has accumulated a lot of experience, so it is moving to a new level. Now Earthlings have access to mana and the Akashic Chronicles. It becomes clearer to John, especially since it all looks like a computer game. Lita is pleased that she was able to explain everything clearly. But not everything is so rosy. Along with privileges, monsters will appear on Earth, so that humanity is not destroyed now and time is stopped. And people now have the opportunity to learn, so that everyone can confront the monsters. After all, these creatures cannot be stopped by a gun or a bomb. Such large-scale actions speak of God's mercy. But John still doesn't understand what will happen to him. Irritation grows within him. A terrible mistake has occurred. But Lita cannot fix it because the portal has already closed. This was the last straw and finally drove the poor guy crazy. He fell to the floor like a small child and began to throw a tantrum. Lita has a solution, but the guy doesn't want to hear about it. The angel tries to calm John down. After all, people will only return in 10 years. He has no idea what he will do all these years alone. However, Lita has a solution. He needs to start training to prepare himself to face the monsters. He must become strong and resilient. This prospect does not please the guy. He continues to panic and wants to go to the rest of the Earthlings, and so began John's long and lonely life on Earth. The streets of the cities remained empty, the sacred temples were empty, and even around the Eiffel Tower in Paris there were no crowds of tourists. The trains were standing still. There had been no people on Earth for 5 years. And John was unrecognizable. He became pumped up, fit, and athletic. And all these years he continued to train. And somewhere out there in other worlds, people honed their mastery of mana to resist monsters. Lita was by John's side during his training. She was amazed at his willpower and perseverance in achieving his goal. But the thing is, John had no choice. This was the only thing left to him. John had indeed become very fit. His muscles were strong and his legs were resilient. He has grown over these 5 years and shown his endurance. Now Lita understood why he was the one who stayed on Earth. She was his only interlocutor all these years, visiting him regularly once a week. She didn't leave the guy in trouble. She cooked him tasty and healthy food. Being an angel, she simply made food appear on the table. And John liked this food more than his mother's. When John realized that he had achieved physical strength, he decided to study martial arts. Lita didn't understand how he could do it on the computer, but the guy decided to watch videos online. The most interesting thing is that all the benefits of civilization were still available, including the internet. But Lita had a different plan. From theory in the computer, they moved on to practice in the fresh air. Movement by movement, the boy mastered the art of fighting, and Lita sat next to him and supported him. So 4 more years passed with daily training. And all this time, Lita watched with admiration as John improved. One day, she offered to become his fighting partner so that the guy would understand how to fight an opponent. John was immediately hesitant. He didn't want to hit his angel. But suddenly he swung sharply, wanting to put all the years of loneliness into this blow. Blood spurted, but Lita stood unharmed and rejoiced. And John didn't look so pleased. His whole face was covered in bruises. And now 10 years have passed. John was no longer a weak student. He was a solid man in a shirt, ready to fight. These achievements were not only his merit, but also Lita's. The guy enjoyed the company of the attractive angel, and he didn't want to part with her. The world looked calm and peaceful, but there was very little time left before the disaster. John waited for the people to return. He was noticeably nervous because he hadn't seen anyone for 10 years, and Lita had already soared into the sky, flying away from him and from the earth. John stood alone on the football field, waiting for the rest of the people. Time passed. Lita looked at him from above and was also confused. There was only the lonely figure of John standing on the ground. The guy didn't understand why no one showed up. Lita returned to explain that there might have been a mistake. John was again overcome with hysterics. He could not wait any longer. But he had no other choice. Time flew by year after year, decade after decade. Even after 50 years, the earth remains empty. And our John was no longer a city boy. He moved to the forests where he honed his strength among the trees and rocks, and Lita continued to accompany him. He no longer waited or watched the calendar or the clock. Lita could see that John was worried. He began to forget his mother, what she looked like. He was tired of training and shadowboxing. However, Lita tried to reason with him because the catastrophe could start at any time. She understood that the guy had reached the point of despair, and John was ready to give up and stop. During his years of loneliness, the guy read thousands of books. He started with textbooks. Then he read everything that was in the library. He decided to study languages and countries, and he went to China. Then he visited Russia. I visited the Statue of Liberty in America. He didn't know what else to do. All the books had been read, but he couldn't stop. After all, there was still so much to be done before the disaster began. He continued to believe in the return of people. And Lita began to pray for the return of the Earthlings for John's sake. The Earth had been alone for 100 years. John continued to live in the woods. Wild animals became his friends and rivals. He became an excellent wild boar hunter, and his strength reached such heights that he could lift a whole wild boar by himself. He decided to try his hand at leatherworking. That's why he killed a boar. Sometimes thoughts would arise in his head that if all the animals died out, then there would be no monsters either. But Lita stopped him, allowing him to hunt only certain animals. If all the animals were killed, the balance in the world and nature would be disrupted. John began to cut up the killed boar. It was a mystery to Lita how he had been enduring all this for 274 years. The knowledge acquired over hundreds of years was enough to butcher a boar the first time. It was time to begin a new stage of training. Now John had to deal with a giant sperm whale. Lita was against such a hunt because sperm whales are a rare species. But nothing could stop John. He also learned blacksmithing. This was not easy for the guy, but he worked hard to put the knowledge he gained from books into practice. He had his failures too. It didn't work the first time. His first knives broke. It took John 5 years to make his first gun. But Lita criticized the blade. However, she did not return it, taking it as a souvenir. Such antics of the angel drove John crazy, and Lita liked to tease the guy. As time went on, John honed his blacksmithing skills. He could create skillful and varied weapons. These were spears, swords, blades, hatchets. Even after decades, John did not stop forging more and more new products until he was satisfied with the results of his work. And there it was before John, the perfect spear. It was a true masterpiece, its metal glittering in the sun. Even Lita, without joking, acknowledged the quality of the work done. John believed that when Mana appeared on Earth and new materials became available, he would be able to forge super weapons from them. Now, the angel Lita understood that this guy really never gives up, but goes to the end no matter what he takes on. John did not abandon martial arts either. He returned to the training ground again and again. His movements were strong and confident, only his opponent was an ordinary log. Thus, one person combined several skills at once, which he mastered equally well. After 1,000 years of solitude, John's body was strong, every muscle like stone. But Lita was worried that the boy would exhaust all his reserves of knowledge if a new direction was not found for him. And the only thing that came to her mind was to turn his determination into a romantic direction. But when she thought about it, she herself became frightened by such thoughts. After all, she was an angel, and he was a man. Conflicting feelings fought within her. She was simultaneously afraid of her thoughts and wanted to help lonely John. The desire to help won out, and the angel decided to do everything possible for the boy. John couldn't understand Lita's behavior, but she didn't know how to start a conversation with him on such a delicate topic. Their eyes met. Tension hung in the air. They looked at each other in anticipation of something new, but then something incredible happened. John noticed how Lita's sword began to move. Lita was frightened by this turn of events. The sword flew out, rushed upward, and flew away from the angel. The horror of what was happening was reflected on Lita's face. She screamed, and then she quickly rushed high into the sky to catch up with her precious sword. John was as frightened as the angel and called to her from the ground. And then he noticed that he was wearing the same clothes he had been wearing on that very day when time on Earth stopped. All his training logs began to crumble into pieces. On Earth, everything returned to its original point. At this time in the heavens, Lita desperately grabbed the sword and asked the Lord not to take it away. Turning towards the earth, she saw that everything there was shining and spinning. There was only one explanation for this. A catastrophe had begun. John on the ground wasn't feeling any better either. An unknown force picked him up and he flew through the air. He was lifted higher and higher towards the heavens. Although Lita was also in heaven, but in a completely different place. They were separated and did not even have time to say goodbye. But Lita had her sword in her hands, which calmed the angel a little. She looked at John with a sad look as he walked away, because she had grown attached to him over these 1,000 years. She did not know if they would meet again. John looked at Lita and thought the same thing. There was the same sadness in his eyes. Lita was an angel of the highest order, and John still had to grow and grow to such heights. At first, the streets were still deserted. The houses stood like empty, lifeless boxes. But then an unearthly glow began to appear. What could it mean? People materialized from this light. They began to appear on the streets, in the university classrooms. The whole space was filled with people. John wandered among them, not feeling the joy he had been expecting for hundreds of years. Suddenly, an unusual board appeared in front of him, a status window. It contained all the information about him, age, skills, and bonuses. The terrible thought began to dawn on the guy that this window was a harbinger of an impending catastrophe. Other people around them also began to see similar windows open, with one difference. For them, only 10 years had passed. People were becoming dissatisfied with the fact that their skills and stats had reverted back to the beginning. The same thing happened with John's performance, even though we saw what he had learned. But he also had another unpleasant discovery. There were people around him who didn't notice him at all. A cold sweat broke out on the boy when he realized that he was invisible. He glanced at his profile again, where stealth was listed as his main skill. No matter how hard John tried, he couldn't turn off this skill to become noticeable again. And around people lived their lives. Is John's destiny from birth to the end of time one of loneliness? The guy decided to go home. All around, he heard enthusiastic voices of joy at the meetings and returns to Earth, and John was also happy about it. Even though no one noticed him, there were people on Earth. And here finally is his home. He enters the apartment and hears such a familiar voice. He sees a frightened mother. Over the course of 1,000 years, he had managed to forget the features of her face. But the confusion was short-lived. A second later, joy washed over him from meeting the closest person. The mother and son hugged tightly in the middle of their apartment. Now that time had started moving again, John could admire the beautiful sunset that cast a golden light over the streets and houses. He enjoyed the sounds and aromas of his mother's cooking, and his father, as before, was reading his favorite newspaper at the table. John's father and mother shared their impressions of places they had visited beyond Earth. And in the guy's head, memories of the years spent with Lita and alone surfaced. He decided not to tell his parents that he remained on Earth so as not to worry them. All the conversations at the dinner table were about mana. The parents did not understand why everyone had to be taken away, including the elderly and children. But John knew it was done to maintain the balance. The parents were surprised by their son's reasoning. He had to quickly find excuses so as not to further expose himself and his knowledge. All his thoughts were now about how to control his speech so as not to let it slip. And my mother was talking about how you can make good money by controlling mana if you sell the bodies of monsters. But then John couldn't stand it any longer. He put his chopsticks down on the table and spoke. The parents looked at their son with concern. Now they knew that their son could not use mana. Surprisingly, John's parents reacted calmly to his confession, citing his genes. And the whole family happily continued their dinner, eating hot noodle soup. John went to his bedroom. But then he saw something incredible, and it stunned him. In the corner of his room stood the spear he had forged while passing the years of loneliness. He began to think how it could have remained if everything else had returned to its original place. But the joy of the find overshadowed all other thoughts. It was a magnificent spear. The weapon had a sufficient set of characteristics as indicated by the screen. John didn't know if the weapon was powerful enough, so he decided to gather information about it. The guy went online. It was a new feeling after years spent reading books. John began to study information about fighter levels and classes. Level 10 gave the opportunity to obtain a sword or bow wielder class, and after reaching level 50, you can move on to the second class. These fighters are strong. They are difficult to defeat. But the highest level of aerobatics is Class 3. It is achieved at level 100. A person becomes a national treasure. Having received so much information, John decided to take a break from the internet. He began to think about the university, about how strange it would be to return there. But his thoughts kept returning to Lita. The guy missed his angel. These thoughts were interrupted by a voice, and the room was illuminated by a glow. John couldn't understand who was in his room and talking to him. His first thought was that a monster had invaded Earth. But it turned out to be a girl. She had dark hair and a pleasant appearance. And she herself was tiny. It was another angel. Her name was Erda. John was shocked. An angel again? Erda sat down on a book and began the lesson of enlightenment. In order to control mana, God created avatars who were sent to study for 10 years. John thought again about how he had become the only one lagging behind. And Erda was sent to help him. And the one who sent her was none other than Lita. This meant that Lita had not forgotten about him. But she could not accompany John because they had developed a close relationship. The boy became sad. After all, he so wanted to see his blonde angel once again. Eartha noted John's excellent physical fitness. She was surprised that he needed help with such data. She remembered all the persuasion of Lita, who with eyes like a cat told about poor John left alone without mana. Thus, the angel was able to persuade Erda to come down and help the boy. And if John's body was prepared, he still needed to learn how to control mana. The guy was very surprised that he would have to master this skill too. Erda was so small that she fit on the top of John's head. It was her presence that would help activate the mana. Even thousands of years of training with Lita could not give John mana because the catastrophe had not yet begun. Erda made some simple calculations and realized that now just a year would be enough for the boy to master this skill. The most interesting thing is that Erda intended to sit on top of John's head the whole time, even in the bathroom during a shower, and when watching videos. But the angel was not interested in the details of the man's life. However, John still felt awkward that someone would be watching him all the time. In general, the guy and the new angel had an unusual relationship. After 1,000 years, John had to return to the university again. And of course, Erda was with him, sitting on the guy's head. The most important thing is that no one has seen the angel. Therefore, she could sit in this place calmly, even on the street. But from the outside, John's behavior and gait looked strange. On the street, everything is not as it used to be. There are military patrols there now. This means that life has not yet returned to its former rut. The army is being prepared in full swing, so nothing will be the same again. But John is tormented by doubts about the effectiveness of such actions, because the monsters are not affected by ordinary weapons. And here, finally in front of the guy, is the building of his university. He sits in the middle of the classroom but remains invisible to his other classmates. This means that stealth mode is activated and cannot be turned off. Erta finds this skill very useful and quite good. But John doesn't think so. For him, it's a loser's skill. Around the guy in the audience, everyone talks only about the skills he has acquired. And John can't understand what exactly the students are talking about. It turns out that the people who returned are trying to combine the combat experience they gained with the mana they have to fight the monsters. But Erta, as an unearthly being, is confident that the camouflage mode is much better than the skills that others have. And although John is still not sure about it, he tries to find advantages. For example, eavesdropping on the conversations of others, and even copy from your neighbor on a test. This is how he learned about the Empress from his classmates. This is a student who, having found herself in another world, turned out to be very talented in mastering the art of magic. The guys also talked about some dungeons. These were traps that God created for monsters. Monsters are lured there with food. And then, when there are enough of them there, these creatures are locked in a dungeon. Monsters cannot escape from there, but people can enter the dungeons and hunt the creatures imprisoned there. But you can't lock all the monsters there forever. Dungeons have an expiration date. They need to be cleared in time. And the higher-level monsters are too smart to fall for the food bait, so it's impossible to lure them there. At this point, the teacher entered the classroom. He decided to open the lesson by checking attendance. And then he began a lecture not on the subject, but on the changed world and behavior in it. John found all this moralizing and geopolitical information unnecessary and boring. He wondered, looking out the window, whether he needed education and a diploma at all. After all, in the future, those who have good control over mana will have superiority, not those who have a bachelor's degree. And the best way to hone your skills is to hunt monsters. While they are weak, you can train and raise your level. John wasn't confident in his abilities. He was at level 1 and had no mana at all. But John's main advantage is his excellent physical fitness and strength. Moreover, the guy had the opportunity to practice his physical skills right now. All the students jumped up from their seats and covered the glass. And right under the windows of their university, the street was filled with giant beetles. The boys' faces were frozen in horror at what they saw. These were real monsters, scary green creatures with bulging red eyes. And then it became clear that the training period was over. Now people would have to survive and put all their efforts into it. Panic broke out among the boys who had just recently been discussing their skills. They didn't know what to do. The urge to fight the monsters vanished. And then they made the only decision that seemed right to them, to run. And John was left alone in the classroom again. He was abandoned again. He began to frantically search for a way out of the situation, and he was ready to go out and fight the monster. At first glance, this creature was smaller than the sperm whale that John had once killed, but it was no ordinary animal. John broke off a chair leg to use as a weapon, and he began to swing it, practicing the fighting techniques he had once learned. Having connected several legs into one stick and sharpened its end, the boy was ready for battle. He was pleased with his resourcefulness. The knowledge gained over thousands of years came in handy. Erta once again remembered Lita's lamentations about John's defenselessness and realized that this was not at all true. With a homemade wooden spear, the boy was ready to put his knowledge into practice. But he was also tormented by another thing, that his identity would be revealed. He did not want to attract attention to himself. Meanwhile, the monsters were destroying everything in their path on the city streets. They threw people up like balls. And suddenly, our hero appeared with a mask covering his face, ready to fight. With his first blow, he attacked and defeated the giant monster. After such success, information about the transition to a new level and the bonuses earned immediately appeared on his status screen. Such success inspired the guy. His eyes lit up with joy. All victories over monsters will be recorded in the system, the Akashic Chronicles. John's mana also increased, which was good news since he hadn't had any mana before. Erta was surprised by the guy's behavior. Does he really get satisfaction from violence? It was too early to relax. A group of creatures was approaching that needed to be defeated. This was John's first battle with not one monster, but a group. Holding his wooden spear in front of him, he confidently rushed towards the danger. He desperately fought against creatures that were dozens of times larger, and yet our hero managed to cope. And again the screen informed the guy that he had received experience points. Each fight brought him pleasant bonuses, but Erta had already warned of a new danger. New monsters with huge red eyes loomed over John's head. And again he was not afraid and began to fight, confidently attacking. A vile green liquid gushed out of the monster's ripped belly. This meant that new experience and points had appeared. But the battle was not over. A monster with a long spear-like trunk was attacking from behind. The monster pointed its proboscis directly at John. And then something amazing happened. It bent, resting against the guy's muscles. Erta was surprised. John was so trained that he became impenetrable. He showed that he had greatly exceeded the capabilities of the human body. And he confidently continued the battle. collecting experience, points, and new achievements. The ground beneath his feet smoked from speed and power, and the monsters continued to attack. A new batch of monsters surrounded the guy from all sides. He stood in a circle of creatures in the middle of the road all alone. But John did not give up and only clutched his homemade spears in his hands more confidently. He attacked and fought back, soaring above the ground as the monsters scattered in all directions. Suddenly, a bright flash of light struck the space around. John was surprised, and before him appeared a girl in a mask, breaking stones with a light movement of her hand. John wondered who this magical stranger was. But it was too early to get distracted. The monsters were not over yet. But now he was not fighting alone. Next to him, a mysterious stranger with purple hair was fighting back the monsters with lightning bolts. Erta was amazed at the girl's powers. After all, it takes a lot of mana to strike with lightning. And finally, there was one last monster left. People watching the battle were amazed at how the fighters were able to cope with such an invasion. John exhaled. This battle was over. And then a group of armed army soldiers appeared on the street. They were very surprised. After all, in front of them was not a flock of attacking monsters, but only lifeless carcasses of monsters. And John wasted no time. He stuck his hand into the monster's body in search of artifacts. Erta told him to take the claws to cut them up and find the mana inside. The guy expertly stuck a spear into the monster's claw and began to cut it apart. The soldiers just opened their mouths in surprise, not understanding how this was possible. And the stranger with magical powers stood and watched our hero with admiration. John's efforts were not in vain. He found a mana stone. It could be used to make strong objects. Turning around, he saw a crowd of people filming the hero on their phones. The guy wasn't used to being the center of attention. It's a good thing he was wearing a mask. A girl with magical powers approached him and asked him to help her cut up the monster carcasses. And then he realized that it was the same empress. At first, he was surprised and shocked by the girl's request. But then he decided to act rationally, asking for his share of the aid. The empress offered 40%, and the guy got down to business. And there was a crowd of people standing around watching what was happening. They were filming on their phones and admiring the empress, about whom they had heard a lot. Some were openly envious and fell into despair because they too wanted to have such power to throw lightning. While John was cutting up the monsters, he listened to the conversations. After all, people were talking about him too. On the one hand, he was glad of his secrecy, but on the other hand, it was a shame that no one knew that it was he, the protector and the hero. But there was no time to be sad. He had to continue cutting up the carcasses, and he plunged his spear into another monster. And he got another stone from there, giving it to the girl. John had already turned to leave, but a group of soldiers lined up in front of him. They didn't want to let the guy go, but to detain him and interrogate him. But suddenly the soldier was struck by an electric shock. It was the empress who shot lightning at him so that the heroes could escape. The crowd cheered with delight. Taking advantage of the confusion, John shouldered the bag of trophies he had obtained and was about to leave. When the crowd came to its senses, the masked guy was no longer in front of them. John's stealth mode was turned on again. He should have felt joy at such a victory, but he felt disappointment and sadness at being left unrecognizable. Evening fell on the city. John sat alone on the street. Pieces of monster shells lay in front of him. The idea came to him to make some kind of protection from these elements. Erta didn't believe in the idea because it was very difficult to deal with materials from monsters. But the guy was persistent and stubborn, and the angel once again remembered Lita with her lamentations about John. While John was pondering the piece of material, Erta concluded that he looked like a cheater. During the conversation, Erta mentioned the name Manhwa, which the guy had never heard of, and he immediately wanted to know more. He began to shake the miniature angel and ask him to teach him. Erta was in pain because she was so small and John was so strong. Crystals played a key role in mana crafting. They could be used to make weapons and armor. These things were not only very strong, but also contained special powers. John's eyes widened. He really wanted to learn this technique. From such displays of emotion, Erta became completely weak and tired. She was angry at Lita for tricking her into sending her to Earth. But it was time to teach John mana crafting. For this, materials and stones were needed. The stones and crystals had to be special, like those taken from a dragon's heart. The stone must be nearby when the process of creating a new piece begins. The final touch will be grinding the stone and applying it to the finished weapon or armor. The finished product will have a higher degree of protection and attack properties. John thought it was all very simple, but there was also more complex craft. He took his skills to a whole new level. However, at the moment, the guy did not have access to this because he did not have enough mana, but he still wanted to know more about this supercraft. To obtain it, a master must put mana into the crystal, and there must be enough mana. But if done correctly, the result will not just be a weapon, but a dream weapon that can spew fire and turn everything into ice. John thought about it. He really wanted to try to get such a weapon, and while he was listening to information about mana crafting, he slowly made himself some armor. So he achieved another skill, which was immediately displayed on the screen. Eartha knew that John had great potential. He was a quick learner and could achieve incredible heights. John decided to immediately put the theory into practice. So he laid out the armor on the ground and took out the magic stone, crushed it into pieces. He was determined to use the stone in the way Eartha had just described. The angel herself was surprised. Was he really going to try making an advanced form of his armor on the first try? With a little effort, a spear began to form that resembled a praying mantis's scythe. Eartha couldn't just watch this happen. She didn't want John to fail, so she decided to take a desperate step to add her mana to the crystal. John was amazed as the stone in his hand glowed. The stones rose from his palm and began to spin in the air, emitting a glow. His armor also began to spin, but for now it was the same shape as before. Eartha couldn't understand whether something had worked or whether it was a failure, but John's face said that everything worked out. He put the product on his hand, and thus moved to a new level of mana crafting. With a slight movement of his armored hand, the guy was able to break the steel chain. His armor was not just protection, but a weapon with a retractable blade. John was pleased, but he wasn't going to stop. He needed to raise his mana level so he could create items without Eartha's help. But at the moment, John was worried about only one thing. With his new product, he had broken the chain of the swing on the playground, so he ran as fast as he could. Eartha decided to stop him. She only needed to cast a restorative spell to make the playground look like it did before, and the news was already full of photos and stories about the search for the heroes who defeated the monsters. In the morning, John took his things and got ready to go to school, but his mother was worried and wanted him to stay at home. The woman had excellent maternal skills, as indicated by her abilities screen. John turned it all into a joke, calming his mother down, and the guy in a good mood headed towards the exit of the apartment. But he was worried about his mother's ability to keep an eye on her son when he was at home. He thought about this as he walked down the street. Eartha added fuel to the fire by comparing the maternal instincts of people and penguins. He was also very worried that he would become invisible not only to those around him, but also to his parents. Eartha decided to change the topic to the news and the government, which is looking for heroes to form a super squad of defenders. But John is not interested. He does not want to be associated with the government and work for it. He is a loner, and it is easier for him to act so that no one limits or drives him into a framework. However, the thought of the Empress did not give him peace. The guy wanted to meet again with a girl who had such abilities. Eartha immediately assumed that he had fallen in love with this mysterious stranger, but John denied this. He had no interest in romantic feelings since the disaster began. Angel didn't want to let go of this topic, citing the girl's lack of interest in increased physical activity. This made the guy lose his temper. He turned red and started yelling at Eartha. There were people walking around, but no one heard the boy's desperate cries because of his ability to be invisible. Tears poured from John's eyes. He still hadn't learned to accept his ability, and he justified his lack of interest in girls by saying that he had been with Lita for a long time. 1,000 years of communication with an angel makes itself felt. John wanted to meet the Empress because of her abilities. He was interested in how the girl learned to control superpowers like that. For this reason, people were sent to another world to learn to control abilities and master higher possibilities. And only John's existence was hidden from the universe, so he remained on Earth when everyone disappeared. But nevertheless, the guy was unique. He could destroy monsters with his bare hands. Suddenly, Eartha perked up. She felt monsters approaching. A large flock of high-level monsters. This scared John out of his wits. He had never fought a monster above level 25. He didn't understand why such high-level monsters appeared so quickly. Eartha noticed it too, but couldn't explain the reason. That's why she didn't tell John anything about her assumptions earlier. This behavior of the angel upset John. He compared her with Lita and not in favor of his new angel. For John, Eartha was arrogant. She always emphasized the difference between humans, whom she considered inferior beings, and the higher angels. John thought about Lita again and missed her, but he was torn away from these thoughts by Eartha, who decided to remind him that the Earth was still in danger. He needed to hurry to meet the monsters. The thing was that God sent all the people outside the Earth to hone their skills, and all the animals remained on the planet. God did not think that anything could happen to them, but a temporary error occurred that stretched 10 years into 1,000. John knew this well. After all, he had spent the entire 1,000 years on Earth, and only thanks to Lita's company, that time did not seem so long to him. Erda managed to tell him about this while they were running towards the monsters, simultaneously showing him the way by pulling his hair. It turns out that animals that have lived on Earth longer than their allotted time have changed. Therefore, the monsters that now inhabit the Earth are much stronger than those that are beyond it. And then it began to dawn on John that with this situation, the Earth was simply doomed, and the bloodthirsty wolves were already approaching closer and closer. The ground beneath their feet shook, the asphalt shattered into stones. John looked down on them from the rooftop and found the task incredibly difficult. The animals looked very angry and strong, their eyes glowed red. But there was no time to hesitate, it was time to attack, and John, spear in hand, jumped from the roof. The impact caused the first monsters to scatter in different directions. And the guy got new skills on the screen. He has already moved to the 9th level. Erda was surprised by John's behavior. She considered him a suicide who desperately threw himself into the thick of the monsters. Bloodthirsty wolves appeared behind the hero again, and he had to prepare for a new fight. Using a spear, the guy scattered the wolves one after another, and they flew off to the sides. John had time to catch his breath a little. But a new batch of monsters was already flying towards him, and among them were people who, in a panic, did not know how to hide from such monsters. Some even tried to use their skills, but they did not work. This scared people even more, and this made the wolves even angrier. They advanced on the people, baring their fangs and flashing their eyes. John desperately rushed into the center of the pack, attacking the monsters. The monster attacked the man, who was unsuccessfully using his powers. The wolf was already very close. But John, at the very last moment, struck the beast down, knocking it to the ground. This act brought the guy to level 10, and the people around him recognized him as the hero who fought the bugs near the university. And although they didn't know who this guy was, people recognized him by his mask. John had fans. But the guy didn't want to have fans or admirers, he didn't need it. He was more interested in the message on the screen. He couldn't move up a level until he raised his class. But then one of the wolves in the pack howled, making his presence known. John, who thought the fight was over, couldn't understand what had happened. There was no time to think. New wolves had already attacked, and they appeared very unexpectedly, as if from nowhere. John didn't know what to do, attack or retreat. The wolves were aggressive, their mouths open, ready to bite at any second. The hero decided to go all the way and attack the pack. The wolves scattered like bowling pins, and for each hit, John received more and more experience. The wolves didn't give us any time to rest, attacking from behind. All John could do was swing his spear in different directions. Finally, he scattered the huge animals covered in blood. The crowd was delighted. One man was able to take down 5 wolves at once. But suddenly the delight turned to fear. The wolf knocked one of the people to the ground and pressed him down with his paw so that he couldn't get up. John was shocked that the wolf took the man hostage. But it didn't change anything for him. He was ready to continue fighting. The boy stepped forward again against the wolf, ready to defend the man lying on the ground. The hostage was both afraid and wanted to help somehow, but did not know how or with what. John himself didn't know what to do, and the crowd behind him didn't let him concentrate. The hero's decision will determine whether he will emerge victorious or become a murderer like the monsters. He didn't think long, but simply attacked the predator with a spear, cutting off its head. John himself did not consider himself a hero, but just an ordinary guy who wants to protect people. But in the fight, the boy lost his weapon, and the wolves, noticing this, were ready to attack with renewed vigor. They attacked John, but he fought back with his fists. Blood flowed from the monster's mouth. The results of thousands of years of training with Lita have made themselves known. He thrust his fists forward, ready to continue fighting hand to hand, and his jumps allowed him to rise above the ground in order to kick a predator. Eartha was amazed by John's ability to make decisions quickly and calmly. And this is not only due to Lita, but also to John, who worked hard. The crowd cheered. They were amazed at how the hero could fight without weapons, with just his fists and martial skill. John stood in the middle of a street strewn with the bloody bodies of predators, and it was entirely his doing. But then a soldier put a gun to his head. When John turned around, he saw not one but a whole squad of soldiers surrounding him and pointing rifles at him. People in the crowd began to be genuinely indignant. After all, this was the hero who saved them from the monsters and freed the hostage. The soldiers did not understand how one man could defeat them all. The army cordoned off the battle site, fencing off the monsters with tape, and the military apologized to John for aiming at him. They didn't think all the monsters were dead. But while the lieutenant was speaking, John had already activated stealth mode. The soldiers thought he ran away quickly, but the guy was behind them the whole time. He decided to move on to the next stage, cutting up monsters to obtain crystals. However, as soon as he touched the monster, he became visible again. The soldiers noticed him and wanted to finish the conversation. They offered to work together to fight the monsters, but John wasn't happy with that. The guy just didn't want to be pestered with assignments, questions, and unnecessary information, wasting his time. And Erta thought that there was nothing useful for John in this collaboration. After all, they didn't have nearly the same skills as he did. The only thing that was difficult to do alone was to carry away all the monster carcasses. The hero's refusal offended the lieutenant. For the first time, they did not want to talk to her because she was a representative of the law in uniform. But then John approached them with an unexpected offer to buy the bodies of the predators. For his part, he guaranteed to butcher them. Since the monsters' carcasses were valuable, the military happily agreed to the offer. There was only one thing John refused the lieutenant. He refused to share the mana stones with her. The fact that the guy defeated the predators hand-to-hand had a big advantage. The fur and bones were intact. If soldiers used firearms, the value of monsters would drop significantly. John set about cutting the meat, which he did masterfully. And the lieutenant secretly filmed the process on video to send to her superiors. And in response, she received an order to immediately bring the hero by any means necessary. And if he is not interested in cooperation, then get him interested. After the boy finished cutting, he had new stocks of mana stones in his hands. They looked like chocolate candies, but Erta warned that they should not be eaten under any circumstances. Otherwise, the rage of the monsters will take hold of whoever does so. For cutting up the carcasses, John was given a whole suitcase of cash. And the lieutenant did not give up trying to seduce the guy in order to persuade him to cooperate with the authorities. But John didn't even look at her, took his suitcase, turned around, and left. Then the girl had no choice but to press the red button, calling for help. Bright flashes lit up the sky. But during this time, the guy became invisible again. While the soldiers looked around in bewilderment, John, with a spear on his shoulder and an angel next to him, calmly left the battlefield. After escaping from the authorities, John decided to check out his skills and classes screen. He needed to decide on his first class, but he couldn't decide. He also learned that the stealth skill was always on because he hadn't learned how to control mana. Once he did, he would be able to control it. John has accumulated 23 different classes, and this is only in 2 days after he got into the Akashic records. Excellent result. Erta recommended choosing the spearman class because the hero fought with a spear. And these are exactly the skills that John learned from Lita. He remembered how he began his training in combat with Lita, and how he lay bruised, defeated by the angel. John had the unique opportunity to be taught by an angel. This is incredible luck. Once the guy levels up, he can upgrade his subclass as well. Although this information surprised John, he thought he would move to another class. That's what he read on the internet. Erta was skeptical about social media and the World Wide Web. Ultimately, John took Erta's advice and chose the spearman class. Because he was attached to his spear and considered it an important part of his success in battle. As soon as John pressed the select button, a new option appeared on the screen. The Bloody Spearman. This meant that he received not just a level, but a unique profession which is not given to everyone right away. This is a unique class that was created especially for him for all the skills and merits that he managed to achieve. Erta tried her best to convince John to choose this button, because this profession was chosen exclusively for him. John did just that, but as soon as he pressed the button, his stats started updating. And in the end, it turned out that he chose not the bloody, but the misted spearman. And because of this, his access to mana management was blocked. And although fogged was a perfect description of the invisible John, he was furious. Along with the chosen profession, the guy's body began to change. He became even more muscular, taller, and stronger. And these processes are irreversible since John has already chosen the class status. But even with the level up, his stealth skills still didn't change. And that's what he had hoped for. And it is not a fact that he will receive mana even after the class increase. It is all about the level of development and physical training. One thing calmed John down. He would be able to get some big and cool skill at a higher level. There was something to strive for. Instead of getting some minor skills with each level, he will get one, but a super strong one. Erta was once again convinced that John, although a lower human being, deserved more, and the angel dragged the guy away again in an unknown direction. And the suitcase with the money remained standing on the ground, hidden from prying eyes with the help of magic. Having gained a new level, John became a monster search agent, and he needs to go in search of them. But you shouldn't hunt monsters alone. There are many agents, so you should only hunt where you can. John wondered if the Empress had become an agent. After all, she had such superpowers. The guy had to work hard to increase his rewards for his work as an agent. John is excited about the new role and the task. He can't wait to get started. And the opportunity soon presented itself. An alert about a monster bear appeared on the phone. People are in panic. They have never seen such a terrible beast. A huge bear standing on its hind legs roared and smashed everything around. While everyone was running in different directions, John was already making a plan of attack. And so he, with his trusty spear in his hand, stood face to face with a giant bear that was several times larger than a man. Sparks and rocks were flying around John. He couldn't understand why. It turned out that the military decided to attack the bear with missiles, and this only made the animal even more angry. The soldiers continued to shoot at the beast with everything they could. But it was absolutely useless. The bear just changed direction, destroying everything in its path. Erda was disappointed at how easily buildings collapsed after encountering low-level monsters. But the thing is that if people were trained, then all the buildings and technologies were created long before the disaster and were not prepared for this. The bear, meanwhile, got really excited. He roared at the top of his lungs, standing on his hind legs. It's time to put on the mask and become a hero. And the active stealth skill was the best way to create the element of surprise in order to strike the first blow. The spear aimed at the monster. Blood gushed from the bear's body. But this did not kill the beast, it only wounded it. It still stood on its paws, its eyes sparkling. John had an army behind him, but there was nothing they could do. They had to leave if they wanted to survive. The enraged bear stood on all fours and began to advance on the crowd of people. They scattered in all directions. But then the monster felt a blow, and he fell to the ground, struck by the spear of our hero. The battle continued. John and the monster struck each other. The spear kept flashing in the warrior's hands. But the most cheerful of all was Erta, who grabbed the guy's hair and jumped with every movement. Periodically, John would revert to stealth mode, which gave him an advantage because the bear would lose sight of him. The boy began to doubt whether his trusty homemade spear would hold up in this fight. Memories of hand-to-hand combat training with Lita and her advice on how to behave and what to pay attention to surfaced in his mind. The most important thing is to concentrate all your weight and all your strength in one point. And it was this advice that he decided to use in the battle with the bear. John brought all his force straight down on the beast's head. Sparks flew, and then blood spurted. The bear roared, and then he fell to the ground, and John immediately received new experience points. The masked hero had another victory to his credit. Erda was proud of her ward and even praised him, which happened rarely. And now came John's favorite moment, cutting up the carcass. The dead bear became noticeably smaller, apparently having lost the ability to acquire gigantic dimensions. Having ripped open the animal's belly with a spear, the guy got down to business. Then a black car appeared on the road. From there, a leg in classic trousers and shoes appeared. A group of people in suits appeared in search of the monster. They were very surprised when they learned that the monster had already been killed. They were very self-confident and pompous guys. They thought that the second-level monster was not strong enough. And then one of the monster hunters noticed our hero in a mask near the carcass. They recognized the boy as a warrior whom the townspeople called Sunbolt. But the boys did not believe that he alone could deal with the bear. They pounced on John with questions about his level, about how he defeated the beast. Sunbolt remained silent, and this made the boys very angry. And the other guys from the company found the hero's behavior interesting and cool. Since there was no work left for the arriving group of warriors, the soldiers asked them for help at another site. Listening to the dialogue, John was surprised at how this guy communicated so easily with strangers. He imagined himself in his place. John would not have been able to speak so freely first. But then the main guy from the company approached our hero and extended his hand as a sign of respect. And John still didn't understand why. This guy admired the hero's skill but wanted to catch up with him in achievements. John wondered why this was necessary. The guy wanted to stand out in a world where levels come first, so that everyone could see where the strongest person was. John couldn't understand this motive. He didn't understand why this guy was so eager to get to the top of the world. Our hero couldn't understand why someone had to compete with him to achieve such a goal. It was enough to just work hard. Overcoming begins with oneself. John knew this very well because he had devoted 1,000 years of training to it. These thoughts upset our hero very much. He wanted to tell the guys a lot, but they had already left, and Erta noticed it. After some time of butchering the carcass, John received valuable bearskins. A military man appeared next to him again and made a proposal. John was offered to install an application that would help track monsters on the map. John decided to try the app out and moved on. The soldiers had to persuade the hero to cooperate again. But they had doubts. After all, the higher the hero's level, the more power he has. And a strong warrior does not want to obey orders, but can control himself. There is no point in even trying to subordinate strong warriors to rules. The world is now in a completely different order where the army does not come first. John had heard the military man's reasoning, but he did not believe in his abilities as they spoke of. He still underestimated himself. and Erda was sure that the guy was capable of destroying the army if he was forced to cooperate with them. Smart military men understand this, which is why they offer cooperation instead of coercion. The map in the app was already showing signals of monsters in 3 different places. John decided to take action and destroy everyone, and he rushed into battle with a giant rat, with a praying mantis, similar to those he had fought near the university, and he defeated a huge bird hovering over the city. And although the guy dealt with 3 monsters at once, he only rose 1 level. These creatures were weaker than a bear or a wolf. That's why the guy earned so little, but he could get the necessary items after cutting them up and sell them to the army, which was ready to pay any amount of money. John was becoming not just rich, but very rich. He was throwing bills up in the air in the middle of the street, but the guy had to be careful with his spending. After all, big money could reveal his identity, so Erda had to erase people's memories so they would forget about such extravagance. The next morning, right in bed, the guy studied the screen of his achievements, but the messages didn't make him happy. He couldn't appear in another world. Does that mean he'll be alone again? Erda volunteered to explain. The monsters had become so strong that they decided to send people away from Earth to accumulate strength. And John is left again, panicked and furious at the same time. With his skills, the guy has nothing to learn there, so there is no point in him moving to other worlds. John's morning was not going well. He was broken by this information, and Erda tries in every way to calm him down. The only way for John to get to another world is to become a higher being. Then even heaven will be open to him. That is, if the guy can reach the level of a supreme being, he will have the opportunity to see Lita. Eartha realizes that Lita and John are now acting like separated lovers, and she is their go-between. But the miniature angel really doesn't like this role. John needs to train even harder to get to another dimension. It will take about 1,000 years. But the guy's thoughts were interrupted by urgent news that martial law had been introduced in the country. This situation is observed in all countries of the world. All events are canceled. Educational institutions are closed. The army is preparing to destroy monsters. John decides that his parents need to travel to another world to keep them safe. The father doesn't see the point in this because he hasn't been able to develop the skills in the past 10 years. Under pressure from his son's persuasion, the father agrees. But you can't fool Mom. She guessed that her son is a hero in a mask. The maternal instinct is stronger than any mask. And then John broke down, tears poured from his eyes, and he told his mother that everyone was ignoring him. Mom gave the boy valuable advice on survival and taught him. All that was left for John to do was say goodbye to his closest people and be left alone. And in the sink, there was a mountain of unwashed dishes, which the guy now had to deal with. And John started washing the dishes. When Erda flew to heaven for her reward, the guy was left alone in the apartment. It was time to visit the workshop he had equipped with the money he earned from cutting up monsters. And although the guy didn't have any equipment or special tools yet, he got down to business with an ordinary saw. In front of him lay the bones and skin of the killed animals. But all the processing took a very long time. Suddenly, a hint to use magic came from the side. It was Erda. John turned around with a happy expression on his face, but froze in surprise. Before him stood Erta, the size of a man. This was no longer a miniature angel that fit on the top of his head. It turned out that she was actually of normal height, but used shrinking magic to help the guy. And Erda brought John a reward from heaven about increasing his characteristics and receiving the bonus of the eternal flame. It was time to demonstrate what this skill meant. John was given an eternal flame that was alive. It never went out and only grew. The guy was very happy with this gift. But the most joyful thing was that Lita insisted on such a reward. Also in heaven, John was given the following task. He could and should have created dungeons on Earth. John didn't understand why he had to do this and how to organize it properly. The boy panicked. He doubted that he could handle it. It wasn't as easy as cooking. But this task was not a whim, but an order from heaven. Therefore, it had to be carried out. John was furious, because the heavens had already deceived him more than once. Instead of 10 years, he himself spent 1,000. Instead of weak monsters, there were strong ones. When time stopped on Earth, the creatures changed. And the dungeons changed too. They didn't work as they should. And John is chosen for this because, thanks to his blacksmithing skills, he is the only person capable of building proper dungeons. But John doubted Erda's praise. He saw selfish motives behind her words. If the guy refuses, monsters will no longer enter the dungeons, and the world will become truly wild. Erta dumped a whole bag of stones and blueprints for creating dungeons in front of the hero. Among the materials were truly rare ones that had not been used before on Earth. The stones were huge, bigger than a football. Heaven also provided John with a whole set of tools. They were of the highest quality. John didn't have to dig the earth or build walls. His job was to create tools to attract monsters. Based on the drawings and using stones, it was necessary to improve the existing dungeons. For such difficult work, the heavens promised the hero a very high reward. This motivation inspired confidence in the guy, and he got down to business. The eternal flame into which stones could be stirred came in handy. The work was in full swing. The guy was covered in sweat from the heat of the fire. Looking at John working hard, Erta wondered if she had made a mistake in recommending him to become a spearman instead of a blacksmith. After all, he is capable of creating a weapon that will defeat not only monsters but also the heavens. When the form was ready, John was overcome with doubts about whether he would succeed. It was painstaking work that required concentration. Erta stood to the side and watched as the boy worked. And then she understood Lita. Why the blonde angel was attracted to a human. After all, she had been watching him for 1,000 years. The angel's thoughts were interrupted by John, who had finished the piece. Such hard work brought out a new skill on John's screen. It seemed to Erta that several minutes had passed, but the guy had been working for 5 hours. Watching him, she did not even notice how time had flown. The product turned out to be flawlessly executed. The angel couldn't understand how an ordinary person could do this. Now all that was left was to use Manacraft. For this, Erta was going to call other angels. John was glad that Lita would be among them, but Erta cooled his ardor. Erta soared above the ground, and a glowing halo appeared above her head. And then other angels began to appear. They could not believe that this artifact was created by a man. John admired the cluster of angels and realized how attractive they were. But it was time to get down to business, and the guy needed to focus on the goal of completing the trap. The rest must be done by angels. When the process began, John screamed from the tension. He felt incredible pressure. He stood resolutely to endure and prove to the angels that he could. John put all his desire to protect people from monsters into this trap, so that they would fall into it and not be able to get out. All the angels joined in the process, reaching out their hands to the guy. They were amazed by the resilience and strength that is inherent in the ordinary earthly man. An incredibly bright light illuminated the workshop windows. The artifact was ready. Surprisingly, John succeeded the first time and stood up to the power of the angels. The product combines alpha and beta options at the same time, which happens very rarely. The angels rejoiced, praised the hero, and called him to go and set up the dungeon right now. John was glad that he was invited along too. He happily agreed. They rose above the city, which looked like it was after the apocalypse, destroyed and empty. And on the ground, giant ant monsters were already waiting. John was invisible to the monsters. This amused the angels. And the guy himself was offended by such ridicule. And so the angels reached their goal. They reached a beautiful place full of trees and flowers. Erta threw the artifact into the air, and he just dissolved and disappeared from sight. Meanwhile, the military was in a panic. The huge rat, which had been destroying buildings in the city, was distracted by something. The giant ants also changed their direction of movement and rushed somewhere. The soldiers couldn't understand why the monsters had become so strange. They all headed towards the dungeon, lured by John's trap. The angels were forced to admit that man had a great talent for creating traps. The other dungeons were activated by magic, so they worked too. During the conversation, Erta and John looked so cute, but they themselves denied it. Meanwhile, the animals continued to head towards the trap, where death awaited them. Standing alone, John thought about the heavenly and divine power, how vast and powerful it was. And he thought of Lita again. If she hadn't been there all these years, he would have gone crazy. Once again, John decided to become even stronger, so that no one would control him and he would be free. In the morning, while John was having breakfast, the news reported the reasons for the migration of monsters, and the boy thought only about his parents. He didn't know when they would return. He couldn't imagine his parents fighting monsters. How could they fight them, and with what? Celery and eggplants. Dungeons were created in different countries and functioned well. John was ready to begin work on the next trap. But the angels needed time to restore their mana levels. The guy suggested inviting other angels. He never missed an opportunity to see Lita. But Eartha ruined his dreams of Lita on Earth. The blonde angel is forced to work hard in heaven for John. The upset guy decided to devote himself entirely to work and went to the workshop. On the street, Erta shrank again to sit on the guy's head and carry out her tasks unnoticed. In the workshop, John decided to make more blanks for traps. For the hero's efforts, the angel presented him with a gift. John thought it would be a rare stone. But Erta helped to dry and sterilize all the materials obtained after cutting up the monsters in a second. Now John could start making protective gloves and shoes. He made gloves from wolf skins. They had unique characteristics with high attack and defense rates. The dire wolf boots were just as good and even had a ventilation feature if it got too hot in combat. All that remained was to process the bear skin, from which the guy decided to make armor. Hours passed, and John continued to spend his time in the workshop. but he had no intention of stopping until he finished the job. And here is the armor ready. It was leather armor with a high durability class. It can withstand even a strong monster. All that remains is to strengthen them with bones. The armor wasn't simple. It had a hidden spike option that appeared during attacks and defense. In such armor, a warrior will feel like a hedgehog who is capable of defeating a tiger. John liked to hide weapons in his armor, as he did with his arm guards. Eartha did not understand this desire, but the explanation turned out to be simple. This is John's usual male dream. After strengthening, unused bones were still left on the table, and John set about creating a butcher's knife. After some time, a beautiful and sharp knife made from bearskin appeared, and from the wolf's bones, John created a terrible but strong mask. When the guy put on all the items, he looked cool and scary. But with this mask, the hero activated his key invisibility skill even more. Suddenly, there was a sound outside the workshop. It felt like there was a monster nearby. A second-class monster appeared in one of the city's districts. All residents were advised to leave for another world. It was strange that there was an animal roaming around the city that had not been taken underground. John wasn't afraid of fighting the bear. He was afraid of cutting it up and making new armor. After all, he had only made this one. But in order to face the monster, it was necessary to prepare a spear. He strengthened it, sharpened it, and improved its characteristics. John was pleased with the changes that had taken place in his weapon, but it was time to go save the city. With each passing minute, the monster was causing more and more destruction. In new armor, the guy ran out into the street where people were running around in panic. The new monster turned out to be not a bear, but a giant leopard. They tried to hunt him from military helicopters, but for the monster, they were like toys. The military was in a panic. Even anti-tank missiles couldn't take the beast. People were in no hurry to help the authorities. In other worlds, they were trained, gained experience, but there the battles were safe, and here was a real ferocious giant. John's face showed determination to fight, not to save others, but to save Earth. Putting on the mask, he confidently ran forward. The beast bared his teeth and growled loudly. His eyes lit up with an evil fire. The leopard was much stronger than the bear that John had attacked earlier. Then a rocket hit the monster's head and a plume of fire rose up. The army fired at him with tanks. When the smoke cleared, the leopard stood unharmed. This only made him angrier. The tanks fled, but the beast grabbed one of them with its paw like a toy, and from above, a hero in a mask was already rushing to attack the leopard. Thanks to his stealth, he was able to get very close to the monster. When John launched the spear into the beast's body, it roared in pain. The remaining people recognized their hero's sunbolt even in a different mask. The beast threw an army tank towards the warrior, and a rocket was flying into his eye again. The soldiers decided to shoot again. Shells rained down on the monster, but it didn't care. The tanks flew straight towards the masked warrior, and in them were the soldiers that John intended to save. He confidently picked up the men and lowered them to the ground. There was no time to lose. The soldiers had to run away, and the hero had to join the battle. A giant monster loomed directly above them, drool dripping from its mouth, its eyes glowing. The beast was not only bigger and stronger, but also smarter than the previous ones. He understood who exactly was dangerous to him, and at the most inopportune moment, the masked hero's stealth stopped working. He became visible to the monster. The beast began an active attack on the people. Its one paw occupied half the road, and the people looked like ants. They started attacking him again with all kinds of firearms. While the leopard's target was the masked hero, other people decided to try using magic to help with the massacre. Flashes became visible from all sides, lightning and spells rained down on the monster. But then a helicopter hovered in the sky, all pierced by electrical discharges. None other than the empress emerged from it. Only this time the girl was not wearing a mask and magical clothing, but looked like an ordinary city dweller. John wasted no time and attacked the beast from the ground, pointing his spear at it. The leopard extended its claws, ready to defend itself. The fight began. Sunbolt confidently rushed at the beast. The warrior hit him right in the eye, and it became bloodshot. People around couldn't understand what was happening. They thought their hero was dying. The girl in the helicopter also froze in horror. A pool of blood formed on the ground, but it was not clear whose it was. John didn't give up. He extended the spikes on his armor, becoming like a hedgehog. He aimed the spikes straight at the beast's head, attacking and defending himself at the same time. And although the predator howled in pain, he remained on his paws, but John himself was thrown to the ground. Poor Eartha barely managed to stay on his head. The predator jumped to attack the lying warrior with all its mass, but he deftly turned away and rose to his feet, jumping up to strike. His spiked boots dug painfully into the animal's skin. And finally, the guy delivered a critical blow. The beast stirred, its actions slowing down. The military took advantage of this to open fire again. People with hammers and blades also rushed at the animal. With their combined efforts, they brought down the leopard. John stood on the beast lying on the ground, rejoicing in his victory. But it turned out that everything was not so simple. While the beast lay there, it moved from the second to the third level. This meant it became stronger. He was turning into a mutant. This scared John very much. There was no time to be scared. We had to deal with the monster faster than it would completely mutate and move to the third class. Suddenly, a large and bright lightning bolt pierced the lying beast from above. John looked up and saw that it was the Empress helping him. The guy himself couldn't kill the beast completely because they had a difference in levels. And the predator continued to regenerate, becoming larger and more terrible. The Empress suggested enhancing the warrior's abilities with magic. There was only one catch. After such an action, the girl would have no mana left. John had one attempt to kill the beast. The Empress jumped out of the helicopter to establish physical contact. Now the girl's life was completely in the hands of our hero, and she began to transmit magic. The spirit of thunder began to enter the guy's body. Erda was surprised that a person on the first level could handle so much mana that was infused into him, and the fighter began to attack. He thrust the spear into the monster's body with all his might. It was impossible to allow the beast to remain alive. Then the missiles would be launched. Hermits and victims would be much more numerous. It's time for a critical strike enhanced by additional lightning bolts. Finally, the monster was defeated, but the girl called the Empress was confused. She did not get her experience back. The thing is, she wasn't on the same team as John. And the guy didn't even know about such rules. After all, he always worked alone. Here the leopard fell to the ground in death throes and almost crushed our hero. It would be strange if he died so absurdly after the battle. The crowd cheered with joy that Sunbolt had made it, but the hero himself could not rejoice. He managed only thanks to the help of the Empress. The joy of victory was also saddened by the fact that the animal's skin was torn. This meant there would be no new strong armor. A crowd with knives had already approached the animal's corpse. They were deciding how to divide the predator's carcass. But John entered the argument because cutting is his skill and specialty. It was decided that Sunbolt would take the majority, the Empress would take some, and the rest could be taken by soldiers and other people. When everyone was satisfied, John rushed at the carcass and began to cut it up. And as the warrior expected, he found a stone inside the beast. It was a very valuable stone because the monster was of high rank. John decided to take only the stone for himself and gave the rest of the carcass to others. But the crowd did not agree with this division. The stone was of great value and everyone was risking their lives. John had to make a decision about what to do in this situation. Would a warrior really just give the stone to people? But John decided to follow the words of his mother, who taught him to settle relationships with some people only with his fists. The guy decided to throw a magic stone to people. But when they divide it, he should get his 60% as was agreed upon at the beginning. If someone is against it or does not give up his share, then fists will come into play. People were afraid that they could not divide the stone correctly, and there was no desire or strength to resist Sunbolt, so they just gave the stone to him. The Empress again asked the guy to divide her share. Finally, the piles of skin and mountains of bones were stacked, but a vehicle was needed to transport them. The Empress picked up the telephone to call her, but the crowd did not want to let the warrior go. They asked to butcher their share of the carcass. John realized that his skill was both a blessing and a burden. People did not retreat and begged for help, although just a few minutes ago they asked to share the magic stone. John demanded 50% of the people's share for their help. This statement outraged the people, but they had no choice but to agree because they themselves could not cope. Having handed over the divided materials, the warrior was about to leave, but he was stopped by the Empress, who admired his skill of stealth. She suggested that they form a team and work together, but John didn't want that. The girl was not going to go to another world, but to stay on Earth to fight. Therefore, they will cross paths. She gave the guy a business card, and he saw that her name was Kat. But for now, I have decided not to call her. Back in the workshop, John decided to focus on creating monster traps. The boy and the angel couldn't understand what was happening to the Earth if monsters were evolving so quickly here. The world was in danger because the advantage was on the side of the monsters. Monsters gained strength faster than people in other worlds. John had no choice but to just do his job, because worrying wouldn't help the cause. Then the thought occurred to him that the trap itself could have strengthened the monsters. Monsters that sensed danger began to evolve faster. Even more dangerous monsters emerge from the dungeons because chaotic crossbreeding occurs there. But if they are not locked up, they will feed not on each other as in the dungeon, but on people. Therefore, it is still necessary to create traps. John loved creating new things. This way, he gained invaluable experience. This habit has been developed by thousands of years of loneliness. Erda felt sympathy for John, and it scared her. After all, she sympathized with a man. The guy continued to work with the thought that he would definitely become even stronger. Night fell upon the city, and the angels returned to the workshop, having regained their strength. It was necessary to breathe magic into the new artifacts created by the guy, and after that, the angels soared into the sky to create new dungeons. And only then did John realize how tired he was. He needed a good night's sleep. At home, looking at himself in the mirror, the guy came to the conclusion that he had gained weight. John grows with each level change, and the boy liked such changes. Erda pretended not to be interested in her charge's transformation and watched TV. She wanted to praise John in her mind, but she was afraid of her own thoughts. She was not used to praising people. This is what Lita did, constantly praising John. Meanwhile, the guy slept soundly, and in his dreams he saw Lita. The morning started with checking the skills and status screen. John and Erda were surprised by the appearance of the rest skill. It turns out that such a skill exists, and this is a very complex skill that even Erta has not yet mastered. John couldn't understand why this skill was so unique. For the last few hundred years, the guy has been looking for a way to relax in comfort. The acquired skill will allow you to sleep well and rest productively. But this is not the main advantage and uniqueness of the ability. Skills have the same evolution as when moving between classes. John didn't quite understand, so he asked for a simpler explanation. The evolution of skills allows you to change externally as well. John has several skills: hand-to-hand combat, spear-wielding, stealth, and rest. Blacksmithing and cutting are already at the highest level. There is no room for improvement. The rest skill provides a variety of different tasks to complete. John panicked. He didn't understand how all this could be achieved. For any of the skills, it was necessary to fulfill a number of complex conditions, including mastery of a spear. It takes a lot of effort for a skill to evolve. For John, achieving this was like climbing the highest mountain. But now he was only at level 28 and did not know how to control mana. John's strength came from 1,000 years of honing his martial arts and spear skills. Over time, he will be surpassed by others who possess mana. Therefore, in order to dominate, he must learn to control mana. And the day John masters this will be truly revolutionary. At breakfast, all John could think about was where he should look for trolls to complete the tasks. Once the mana is activated, the earth will begin to be inhabited by monsters that did not exist here before. And the news showed the level of destruction in the place where John had recently defeated the leopard. But the beast itself was no longer there. Its gigantic carcass was removed within 2 days. The strangest thing is that there was neither the beast itself nor the people who divided the carcass. They were all swallowed up by the dungeon, which suddenly opened up right in that place. How could it be a dungeon? And was there another living monster there? John himself saw a dead leopard lying on the ground. The animal was not alive. After all, he himself had butchered it. But there was a small chance that the monster was pregnant, and its offspring would be born very soon. And this newborn absorbed the remaining people. John blamed himself for everything. If he had done better research, the people wouldn't have died. But these consequences were primarily caused by the greed of people who could not share the spoils. This did not calm John down. After all, people died, and among them were many who supported the hero in the mask. Eartha didn't think John was capable of such compassion. After all, he never fights for anyone. Now it became clear why the animal clung to life until the end. It tried to protect its cub. During the butchering, John left half of the carcass untouched. Apparently, that's where the leopard cub was. And while people were arguing over the spoils, he managed to be born. For John, this meant only one thing. There was a third-grade monster roaming around somewhere. And this monster clearly had high stealth skills. It won't be easy to deal with him alone. You need to be well prepared. This is the first enemy with the same stealth skill. If the beast has a well-developed stealth skill, then the strength and defense should not be at a high level. John decided not to waste time and immediately begin making equipment. But first he needed to ask the empress for help, so he took her business card. But Erda stopped him in time. He shouldn't call from his phone, because then he would reveal his identity. So the guy went to a payphone and dialed a number. Kat was surprised to see a phone booth number on her mobile. She couldn't figure out who was calling. But when I heard that it was Sunbolt, I was very happy to receive the call. It took a lot of effort for John to make this call and maintain the dialogue. It was necessary to immediately bring her up to date and explain that it was a secretive monster that led to the disappearance of people. Kat didn't need much explanation as to what exactly had happened. She quickly understood everything. Now it was time for John himself to get ready. He returned to the workshop and laid out the bones and leopard skins. Ert was eager to find out what exactly John was going to make. He intended to make pegs out of bones, but Erda didn't understand what they were for. They were shaped like spears, which is exactly what the angel had assumed. However, when she saw the finished product, she realized that it was a harpoon. The harpoon was different from the spear. It was not to be held in the hand, but thrown at the prey. This weapon is used to hunt whales to attract them to themselves. It easily enters the victim's body, but is difficult to pull out due to the hook. And John made the rope out of leopard skin so that it could withstand the monster's strength. All that remains is to craft the mana using the Mind Stone. Erda was surprised that the guy was willing to spend the entire stone on weapons alone, leaving nothing behind. But it was about the safety and life of the hero, so he was ready to do so. And they started crafting with stone. The result was the creation of an ideal weapon, aggressive and brutal. Once again, this product had both alpha and beta functions at the same time, and these functions were top-notch, which made John very happy. When the weapon was ready, he called Kat again. She had to be careful because the beast had a stealth skill and could attack without being noticed, and although he was born immediately after his mother's death 2 days ago, he still remained in that place between the houses. The monster's goal is to avenge his mother. That's why John and Kat need to be especially careful. After all, they killed her. The guy has a plan. First, he has to make sure the beast can't use its stealth skill. John walked down an empty street. Cracks in the buildings were the marks of a recent battle. Erda sensed that the monster was somewhere close. It hid, using its ability to hide. John began preparations by stretching out the rope he had made. He did it loudly on purpose to draw the beast's attention to himself. But it didn't react. Erda believed that the problem was John's own high level of invisibility skill. But the guy wasn't so optimistic. He couldn't believe that the beast couldn't figure out where the enemy was. But then the hero listened and realized that the predator was somewhere very close. A huge clawed paw appeared, and then a leopard appeared right in front of the guy's face. It's time to take action. The beast was in an aggressive mood. Its eyes glowed red and its fangs were sharp. John prepared the rope for his trap, and he threw the harpoon towards the beast. The tip of the weapon painfully struck the monster's skin. The leopard roared in pain. He was smaller than his mother, but had great strength. A harpoon handle protruded from him. Despite the high skill bonuses, John's strength was only enough for the harpoon to go in halfway. Due to the beast's main skill being stealth, it was not as strong as normal third-class monsters. While John was thinking about this, the beast came to its senses and began to attack. The hero had to be more careful. The leopard rushed forward at the warrior, but since he had a harpoon in his body, the rope tightened and stopped him. The monster couldn't understand what had happened, why he couldn't move on. John launched the harpoon at the beast again and got a critical hit bonus. So far, the guy was happy with his actions and work. But the beast did not calm down and continued to strike. This caused John's protective arm guards to fly off. All the bone blades embedded in them broke. But thanks to this protection, the warrior's hands remained intact. The fight continued. The leopard continued to swing his clawed paws. His blow caused everything around to fly apart. John was shocked by the monster's skills, which surprised him with every movement. But the rope holding the beast's body made itself felt. The predator was in pain. The more he resisted, the more pain it became. However, the leopard was not stupid. He intended to chew through the rope. John needed to use the remaining harpoons quickly while the rope was still intact. The boy didn't think that monsters could have such skills. He thought that they were just big beasts. But now his opponents were monsters whose actions did not fit into the laws of logic. Another harpoon flew into the leopard's body. The rope pierced the beast's paw. Now he could not use his skills with full force. But it was too early to relax. The beast was not defeated. John heard his name being called from the side. Is it possible that a monster is speaking to him? But the Empress was heading towards him in a car at high speed. She immediately entered the battle, throwing lightning bolts. Double bolts of lightning rained down towards the beast. The girl was surprised at how John was able to grab and restrict the monster's movements. John was amazed by the Empress's lightning skills and power, and believed that she was no ordinary predator hunter. The guy's thoughts were interrupted by the beast, which growled and began to move again. It was necessary to prepare for a new attack. John already had another harpoon ready. He launched it towards the beast. Another defeat fell on the paw. It was necessary to attack the monster with all force as quickly as possible, because it was unknown how long the poles with ropes would hold. Kat prepared her attack, gathering strength to strike with a powerful bolt of lightning. The beast tried to get up and move. The monster still had strength, which meant it hadn't run out of mana yet. The beast's gaze was eloquent. It spoke of the intention to kill the enemy. John had seen such eyes many times over the course of 1,000 years. In moments of danger, the eyes of animals shine much brighter, because after that, there will be emptiness. The beast became enraged. He let out a loud roar, and blood from his wounds sprayed in all directions. He rushed forward towards the warrior. Stones flew towards John. The monster became even more angry. It was necessary to be careful. The Empress arrived just in time with a bolt of lightning, but the powerful charges did not reach the leopard. It was necessary to approach closer. Despite the ropes, the beast roared and twitched in all directions. John couldn't immobilize him on his own, so he had to wait until the Empress gained strength. Very strong skills were required. Kat's driver pulled out a gun, which would be ineffective against the monster, but it gave John an idea. He grabbed the weapon and ran towards the leopard. The warrior did not like to ruin the skins of predators with weapons, but there was no way out. It was impossible to use a spear or hand-to-hand combat against this leopard, and harpoons could not hold it for long. At that moment, the predator pulled out the posts that held the ropes. The leopard ran quickly after John, and the Empress could not begin to attack. It takes another minute to restore strength. So far, 2 ropes have held the beast, but it is unknown how long they will hold. John aimed the gun at the leopard. The shot hit the predator in the eye. Blood spurted out. John's screen immediately notified him of the new achievement. The Empress was surprised that it was possible to damage the beast with an ordinary rifle. The thing is that John's shooting skill played a role here. It expanded the capabilities of the weapon. Finally, the Empress was ready to attack. John fired bullets at the beast, and then he rushed forward, and then the pillars couldn't hold up any longer. This meant that there was nothing holding the leopard back. He roared at the top of his lungs. Just at that moment, the Empress launched a triple bolt of lightning. Lightning struck the beast, but it was unclear whether it was possible to overcome him. The leopard activated stealth mode. This amused John since this skill had not worked on him, so the warrior saw the location of the monster and attacked it. The Empress was amazed by the hero's ability to see even through stealth. The guy wrapped the leopard in ropes, twisting it. John was in no hurry to kill his opponent. He had other plans. He suggested that Kat create a team so that the experience gained from killing a monster would be shared between them. They shook hands to seal the agreement. Now there were 2 of them in the team, and John could see the statuses of the group members. It's time to return to the leopard. We need to deal the final blow to finish him off. The screen began to display all the bonuses from the victory, and John himself was surprised when he went straight from level 28 to level 36. The guy felt sick from all this experience. The Empress had the same feelings. Finally, the guy began to come to his senses. John stood next to the body of the slain beast tied with ropes. He felt sorry for the skin, which he could not keep intact due to the use of the gun. Although he wouldn't be able to make armor out of a third-class monster, he had to take everything he could after cutting it up. John felt the mana stone in the monster's head. It was a stroke of luck that it was in both mother and cub's possession. Not every monster has stones. They appear from mana coagulation at the moment of the monster's death. The higher the class of the predator, the less likely it is to find stones. John pulled a huge red stone out of the leopard's body. Obtaining such a stone is a condition for the evolution of skills. But John couldn't just take the whole stone. After all, he fought alongside the Empress. She just walked up to the guy, still suffering from a headache due to the large amount of experience she had gained. Since they were now a team, Kat wanted to know Sunbolt's real name. She also suggested leaving the stone to John and giving her half of the carcass after cutting it up. The guy was surprised that the Empress was content with such a small part for her services. But Kat thought it was important work to butcher monsters, because there was no point in killing them if you couldn't butcher them. John set about cutting it up with skill. At this time, Kat was already contacting someone on the phone. Erda advised the guy not to break off relations with a girl who had such connections and views on the fight against monsters. John had a hard time getting close to anyone. He was a loner and it scarred him for life. And so the cutting was finished. Just at this time, the trucks called by the Empress arrived. And then Kat decided that they couldn't be a team. John began to panic and think about what he could have done wrong. But the girl did not consider herself worthy of John's strength. She wanted to catch up with him and then become an equal partner. And they shook hands again. John felt strange. On the one hand, he was free, but at the same time, he felt sadness from the loss of his partner. Before leaving, Kat asked the guy for his phone number. She promised not to tell anyone his secret and real name. However, John didn't know if he could completely trust this mysterious girl. He decided to take a chance and agreed to leave the number. It was the first time John had exchanged contacts with a girl, and it was unusual. Looking at the achievement screen, John couldn't believe that he had dealt with a third-class monster. The guy had one problem for skill evolution: trolls. There were none on Earth, but he couldn't get into another world. But trolls had to appear on Earth as well, since there was more and more mana here. John needed troll blood to evolve his rest skill because their blood contains healing properties. But for this, you need to have resistance to poisons. Without it, you can't eat the monster's flesh. Also, a problem were the second-class sleeping monsters, which had to be killed in one hit. To do this, it was necessary to strengthen the weapon well. But Erta did not want to share the valuable stones from the heavens. John took on the task of making and modifying weapons. He didn't know what he could do with the tendons he got from the leopard. While he was thinking, he accidentally dropped these parts into the fire. But something incredible happened. The tendons in the fire began to change. Erta herself did not know about such capabilities of fire. A few minutes later, John pulled the improved tendon out of the fire. It had amazing elasticity and stretched perfectly. The new tendon was resistant to fire and water and could withstand strong blows. John had an idea. He decided to make a battering ram out of it. It will look like a gun, but it shoots pegs instead of bullets. And although such a weapon is not easy to use, its power is impressive. Rubber tendons will serve as a substitute for gunpowder. Inspired, John sat down to draw. The leopard's teeth will serve as bullets. They are sharp and strong. John wanted to strengthen the item with a leopard mana stone. However, if he did, he would lose it and would not be able to use it in battles with the trolls. The boy didn't want to meet such monsters again to get the stone, so he decided not to use it. A little effort and the bump stop was ready. All that remains is to put a rubber band made of tendons on the tooth bullet. The product was large and heavy. It took a lot of strength to use it. By the time the guy charged it, he was exhausted, and it was only level 1 power. It will be difficult to use such a weapon in real combat conditions. At the 3rd level of power charging, John was completely exhausted. Studying the options screen after creating the chipping weapon, the guy saw that the weapon was endowed with an alpha function and without crafting mana. The main drawback of the product was its length, which was 3 meters. This is a weapon for giants. Now it was necessary to develop a variant for small monsters. And then John took up traps. The angels visited the workshop again to activate it. The traps John created were great, so they were always overrun with monsters. And thanks to such quality of products, other traps around the world have become stronger. Such lure traps could not be used thoughtlessly in places where there were no monsters. It could lead to the birth of new ones. Super strong monsters will appear that will gnaw out the entrances to the traps. Therefore, it was impossible to allow the dungeons to become overcrowded. John was upset that he still didn't have enough strength to deal with a 3rd-class monster on his own. His stealth skill helped him with the leopard and the lightning of the empress. The number of traps needs to be reduced to avoid overflow. Other angels blamed John for such unforeseen situations and wanted to limit his power. But Erta was against it. She was sent to help him, not to control him. The angel lost her temper and pointed a sword at her colleague. John didn't understand what was happening. He had never seen Erta so angry and aggressive. The other angels were also surprised. They decided that it was not worth interfering in Erta's affairs. From this confrontation, John concluded that angels are the same as people. The angels took the traps and flew away. Erta came to her senses. She felt embarrassed that John had seen her in such a way. Surprisingly, the angel who accused John was simply jealous of the guy's level of talent and skills. And again, our hero felt that Erta had overestimated him, and the miniature angel was upset that he had such a low opinion of himself. However, this was also a good thing. After all, a self-confident person with such abilities might decide to challenge God. John was rewarded for the traps he made. Erta was supposed to reveal the location of a dungeon with a new type of strong metals. This information really interested the guy. In the morning, John went outside, but it was completely empty. It was reminiscent of the time when he was left alone on Earth. This time he knew where everyone was and when they could return. The Empress also remained on Earth, ready to fight the monsters. The guy was glad that he was no longer alone. John was heading towards the metal dungeon. When he saw the blue glow, the boy realized that he had arrived. He was glad that the dungeon was within the borders of his country, since the borders were closed due to martial law. Having found the entrance to the dungeon, John decided to go in. But at the entrance, there was a warning that people below level 50 could not enter. John was only level 36, but he had the angel Erta with him. She had the ability to lift entry restrictions. This time I managed to get in. John froze in amazement. The cave was filled with stones. They were everywhere. This was one of the dungeons created by John. New monsters appear on Earth when conditions are favorable for them, like bugs appear in rice barrels, or how cockroaches appear in a room that hasn't been cleaned for a long time. Now that John knows about the dungeon, he will need to kill monsters in it and get their hearts. Their hearts are that unearthly metal hidden in the dungeon. John is upset by this turn of events. He expected to mine the metal as a fossil. It was a mistake to take with him a bag of tools for mining hard minerals. So much equipment fit into one small bag thanks to a space-enlarging spell. This spell does not reduce the weight of objects. However, John was able to carry a large load on his own. There were only stones in the cave, but they turned out to be real monsters. John didn't think they could look like this. The boy pulled out an unusual tool from his bag. John had made it from the bones of the last leopard he had killed. With the tool in his hand, he rushed at the monster. The impact sent the stones flying in all directions. John was surprised that the monster died on the first blow. In front of him lay a shining blue stone. This was the cave monster's heart. It contained all of the creature's mana. If the monster senses danger, it can strengthen the heart with mana. That's why the surprise attack effect is so important. John was bored in this dungeon where killing a monster seemed so easy. He walked through the dungeon and spent a lot of time searching for new monsters. One hit is enough to defeat the enemy. John lacked thrills and adventures, and immediately reached the maximum level in blunt weapon mastery. But then a large monster appeared in front of John, larger than those he had met before. It was a big metal heart, and it had 20 more levels. Now the hero could test his new weapon, charged to maximum. He jumped up to put all his strength into the blow, and he pulled the trigger. The bullet destroyed the monster, but it got stuck in the ground and cracked, so it couldn't be used again. John had to find new ways to use the bullets. The heart that was found turned out to be much stronger than all those found previously. Erta insisted that finding a large metal heart was a great stroke of luck, and that it would never happen again. But an even greater monster appeared before them. For him, John also had a tool, a furious hammer. With joyful cries, the boy threw himself onto the stone block. Within a few days in the cave, John had significantly improved his performance. They left there only when they had completely cleared the dungeon. When John came out of the dungeon, angels stood before him. Just at this time, all the permit traps on Earth finished setting up. Dungeons were activated all over the world. Monsters began to disappear from the streets. They ended up in dungeons, and people began to return to Earth. The news reported that peace was gradually being restored in the countries. People are motivated to return to Earth. That is why the dungeons are being activated so actively. John realized that his parents had to come back too. The guy was making tools and was very tired. He was in such a hurry to work without rest because the angels were soon to take away the tools. John managed to make armor with the addition of the mined metal heart. The armor had an amazing set of functions. If an attack occurs suddenly, the force of the blow immediately increases. Because John created such unique things, he has been given the status of a legendary creator. Eartha warned about the danger of selling items with 3 functions to other people. It will give away John's power. The guy also made a set of weapons to replace the old spear. And all the old weapons and armor went into the fire. This increased the flame level. John realized how tired he was. He needed to go home and rest. After sleeping, he saw his parents at the table who had returned from another world. He greedily pounced on his mother's food, which he missed so much. The idyll of breakfast was interrupted by the father, who was getting ready for work. Father couldn't fight the monsters, so he had to go back to work to avoid getting fired. Before his father left, John asked him to put on a shirt with protective features. The mother was interested in whether her son would return to school, because universities were also beginning to open. John was not in the mood for learning. Mom did not try to persuade him. The guy also gave his mother a protective shirt. Instead of going to university, he returned to the workshop. And I couldn't believe my eyes. She changed overnight. All the equipment was improved, the instruments were shining, so the heavens decided to thank the guy for his success. The materials of the instruments were unearthly. John was delighted with such a gift. Erta also presented a book on poison resistance. The knowledge from it will help avoid poisoning even from super strong monsters. Now John could consume troll meat without fear, but the most valuable thing was that Erta revealed the location of the troll's dungeon. That place turned out to be America. John immediately decided to go there, so he went to the airport. It would be his first time flying on a plane. But Erta put him down. The guy doesn't have a passport or visa. This doesn't stop John. He's going to fly illegally. Today, he fully appreciated his stealth skills as he bypassed all security systems. Taking advantage of his hidden position, he took drinks from the flight attendant's cart. During the flight, the boy noticed a jet fighter. They were controlled by those who had abilities in case monsters appeared. John had to change planes in Los Angeles to get to Arizona, and right away, everything was going great. But at the airport, people were running around in panic because of the monster. This happened because of excess. This is a situation where a monster trap explodes and mutated monsters burst out. These monsters are significantly stronger than they were before they were trapped. Because the trap absorbs energy, the environment changes. That's why the airport turned into a stone desert. Excess begins due to an evolving world or strong magic. But the main problem is that mutants affect other dungeons as well. So the excess causes a chain reaction. We can't let the monsters go to avoid new surpluses. John needs to complete this task to get the reward. People are running around the airport in panic, and the giant mutant crocodiles are advancing. John thinks the monster is weak. But don't forget that this is a second-class monster with unique abilities. It's time to don your armor and get out your new weapons. Without thinking twice, John unleashed the full force of his new spear on the alligator. The mutant doesn't have a mana stone, but the guy can take him apart. Americans are not familiar with the masked hero, so they don't know who this strong guy is. John forgot that his stealth skill doesn't work if he's in the thick of things. The second mutant released a ball of fire from its mouth. John started to run away so as not to get burned, but the fire caught up with him. Surprisingly, after a direct fire attack from the monster, the hero remained unharmed. He went outside and was ready to fight off attacks again. But there were none. The monsters attacked others. People decided to join forces to fight the monsters together. While John stood aside in shock, the magic users tried to hold back the mutants. People fought furiously with the monsters, attacking from all sides. All John could do was watch from the sidelines. Another warrior appeared among the people, dressed in armor and a helmet that hid his face. He immediately entered the fight. John decided to step in and help this warrior. He aimed his spear straight into the monster's mouth, and a mixture of fire and blood gushed out of the wound. The monster needed a record of the achievements of a strong warrior, but John doesn't give up so easily. He also wants to gain experience for such a monster. The monster saw that this warrior was not just strong, but the strongest. By killing him, they would be able to evolve. A warrior in armor approached John to thank him for his help and rescue. The voice was female. John advised not to let down one's guard during the fight. But the battle was not over. The monsters had to be dealt with. Having defeated some, it was too early to relax because the reptiles were advancing again. It was necessary to kill the leader of the pack so that the flow of monsters would stop. And the monsters were already making a plan to kill the warrior himself and get his records. John began to attack. In response, flames spewed out by reptiles rushed towards him. Finally, the guy was able to stick a spear into one monster's throat. The warriors who had tried to fight before this admired the hero's skills and strength. And the guy had already soared above the monsters to find the leader, and he found it. It was a large alligator with a different shade of skin. John aimed his spear straight at him and dealt a crushing blow. John needed to get away from the bodies. These monsters exploded on contact with a person. This gave the guy the idea of destruction. It is necessary to establish contact in order to cause an explosion. And the warrior succeeded. Fire and stones flew in different directions, and the crowd was amazed at the guy's resourcefulness. The monster did not give up and threw a piece of the building towards the warrior. Giant boulders flew at John. He jumped on them and balanced like a surfer on the waves. Suddenly, there was an explosion and a new plume of fire rose up. The crowd thought that the hero had died from the explosion. But John rose higher and took out his new weapon. He aimed the end of the hammer straight at the beast's eye, and he released the trigger. The leader fell to the ground and howled in pain. The rest of the reptiles rushed to his aid. A crowd of giant monsters pounced directly on the people standing nearby. But a moment later, they were already lying on the ground in blood, because John used a giant sword. The leader of the monsters was lying on the ground but was still alive. He still wanted to get the strongman's recording. When John turned his back, strange sounds were heard. Huge stones rose into the air, driven by the power of the monster. Until its last breath, the giant monster did not give up hope of gaining the powers of a hero. But it was all over. His dead body lay among the stones. John was surprised that the mutated monsters were stronger than the leopard, but had a lower level. After the battle, other warriors approached the boy to praise his abilities. Among them, he recognized heroes with whom he had crossed paths before. John felt jealous of these people. He still did not believe in his own strength, and the warriors continued to admire his skills. John had no time. He had to deal with the rest of the reptiles. He rushed to do it. He couldn't shake the thought that he would miss one monster and that it would survive. And then when the guy arrives at his destination, he will attack with a new army of monsters. He couldn't allow this to happen, so he furiously rushed to kill. The monsters flew in all directions. Finally, the job was done. There was still one more question to be solved: how to carry away a whole mountain of monster corpses. It turned out to be not easy. The guy even asked the angel for help to give the bag control function. Finally, the task was completed and the battlefield was cleared. Then Erta used her power to call upon the angels for help. Crafting with mana was needed so that the bag could be picked up. The angels immediately got down to business. They cast magic on John's bag. Now he could adjust its weight whenever necessary. Even the petite Erta was able to lift the bag. One of the angels revealed the secret that they helped not only John, but also other promising warriors. One of the wards was Yuna. The guy was advised to help her whenever possible and establish contact. But Erta stopped the angel from telling anyone about John's abilities. After joking with each other a little, the angels got ready to fly back to heaven. John wasn't sure he could help Yuna because he was a loner, and it was hard for him to approach and talk first. It's time to get a reward for the completed task. The guy was gifted with superhuman strength. It was necessary to fly further. Yuna and her partner were already seated in the plane. They looked for John, but did not find him. The guy heard their conversation, but decided to pass by. Once there, all the heroes sat down by the fire to eat. John had to cook. It was the meat of a giant scorpion, which they immediately cut up. If you don't understand how the heroes ended up together, let's go back a little. When John arrived at the place, he found the entrance to the cave. The entrance turned out to be huge. Its size is due to traps that were mistakenly placed nearby. Because of this, the dungeons merged into one huge one. So John needs to be careful. There are 2 troll chieftains in this dungeon. The dungeon looked unusual. It was not a cave, but a beautiful green meadow. There was a troll walking on it, and then he suddenly went to bed and fell asleep right away. He had a very well-developed skill of rest. This is why troll blood is needed for the evolution of this skill in humans. While the troll was sleeping, John crept up on him with a spear, intending to attack. With a flick of his wrist, he launched the spear at the monster and killed it. Obtaining the first portion of blood turned out to be easy. Inspired by his success, the guy rushed to look for other trolls. A couple of warriors from the airport also approached the same dungeon. They needed scorpion venom to achieve their goal. Yuna viewed the dungeon trip as a positive experience, either as a date or an adventure. Their helping angel warned them to be careful. When evening came, John made a fire, pitched a tent, and roasted meat. The troll meat seemed incredibly tasty to him. Although the meat was poisonous, his poison resistance skill had increased so he could eat it. After 5 days, John got bored. He killed trolls, cooked meat, but he didn't meet any other monsters. Erda justified this with the stealth skill, which hid not only John, but also the fire and the smell of meat. The day came when the warrior had to kill the last troll. John stabbed his spear into his body and gained experience points. But the status screen announced that the hero would not reach level 50 until he upgraded his class. There is 1 step left to the desired 2nd class. Expert level will increase the characteristics. The guy will become an expert in all types of weapons. But John decided not to choose a spear or weapons expert. He chose the unknown status of a novice reaper. Status characteristics appeared on the screen, and John became despondent. He needed to kill 50 Class 2 monsters with just 1 hit. How is that possible? It was necessary to strengthen the weapon with mana crafting in order to be prepared. When the deed was done, he saw a giant scorpion, and Yuna, trapped in his claws, screamed and asked for help. Her partner Glenn was already running to help her. John looked at them and couldn't understand why these warriors couldn't defeat weak monsters. And although he didn't want to meet with them anymore, he couldn't stand aside and not help. He grabbed the skewer on which the meat had just been roasting and threw it at the scorpion. The claw opened and Yuna flew down. On the ground, John just caught her in his arms to keep her from falling, but then he pushed Glenn aside, and he himself ran to attack the monsters. And again he dealt a critical blow to the scorpion. It was so easy for John to defeat this monster because the main weapon was poison, and the guy has resistance to it. The hero stood over the carcass and was already thinking about what this meat would taste like. When Yuna came to her senses, she was surprised at who her savior was. In him, she recognized the masked hero from the airport, the Dark Prince. John couldn't understand why she was calling him that. It turned out he was trending on social media. The nickname Dark Prince of America was given to the hero by people on the internet. John did not continue the dialogue and turned to the carcass to continue his business. Glenn and Yuna were not happy that he ignored them, but they admired the way he cut up the scorpion. When evening came, John set about preparing the meat. A couple of warriors were very hungry, so our hero offered them something to eat, and Yuna made the poison disappear from the meat. Now all the heroes could start their dinner, and John admired their attractiveness. But he also couldn't shake the thought of injustice. They were so beautiful and they were helped from above, but the heavens had forgotten about him for 1,000 years. This is how the 3 warriors met. Yuna wanted to know how John wasn't lonely himself, and she offered to join their team. But the guy immediately refused them, which greatly surprised the attractive girl. John thought Yuna and Glenn were a couple, but they turned out to be just teammates. Glenn handed the guy a business card that was very similar to the one Kat had given him. Yuna gave me the same business card. Are they all from the same company? The couple retired to finish their business. They were upset that John did not accept their offer to collaborate. While they were walking and talking, our hero followed them in stealth mode and heard everything. Yuna and Glenn were on a mission from heaven. They needed scorpion venom. John didn't understand why the couple came to the troll's dungeon for scorpions, and a scorpion was already approaching them. John easily threw another skewer at him. Glenn and Yuna didn't even notice the monster due to John's stealth. They walked and looked out for giant scorpions, and it was a big surprise for them to see something like this appear right behind them. It was a very large scorpion. Its size frightened a couple of warriors. Glenn needed extra strength to deal with him, and Yuna began a magical ritual to attract her. Now the warrior could attack the monster. John stood aside for now and decided not to interfere, and behind Yuna's back a giant troll grew. He became furious when he saw people and attacked them. But then John decided to intervene and took out his chipping hammer. He fired straight at the troll. The bullet passed right through. The giant fell to the ground. But the bump stop broke because the impact force was too great. Having done his job, John said goodbye to the guys again. They had to continue fighting the scorpion, and Yuna decided to take a desperate step. She asked John to help kill the scorpion, and in return she offered everything except poison. Our hero agreed. Glenn wasn't thrilled that the girl had let an outsider in on their plans, but he needed help in the fight. Just then the scorpion grabbed the warrior and squeezed him in its claw. John was already rushing to his aid. He cut off the claw with his spear and Glenn fell out of it. He then struck the monster's skull. Glenn lay on the ground and wondered how anyone could fight like that, but he had to attack the giant too. The warrior took out his sword and attacked the scorpion. John was amazed that Glenn was such a weak warrior, so he delivered another strong blow to the skull, in the same place where he had already hit. Finally, the monster was defeated. John cut up the carcass, separating all the elements with poison. He found a level 3 mana stone. It was an incredible find. And partners Yuna and Glenn again offered John to join their clan, but again they were refused. The guys continued to persuade. However, no amount of persuasion could make our hero change his mind. He just wanted everyone to leave him alone. Erta had to intervene to send the annoying heroes away. Finally, they left. John could take off his mask and become himself. Since all the tasks were completed, his rest skill could evolve. John activated his trophies and received excellent regeneration. Now his body will be able to recover from injuries. And when the skill is strengthened, he will even be able to revive if he dies. The guy really liked this skill. John had another difficult task ahead of him. He had to kill 100 monsters to complete the Reaper's task. And the trolls with clubs were already approaching him. They were no longer resting under the trees. It seems they are gathering to take revenge for the murder of their leader. It took several days to deal with these giants too. At first there were many of them, but then their number dwindled. The trolls did not attack. They did not want to die. John concluded that someone was forcing them to attack. But who was it, since their leader had been killed? He and Erta did not wait for another monster to appear and decided to leave the dungeon. But the road they came by changed. The worst thing is that the exit has disappeared. Erta couldn't establish contact with other angels, so she assumed that this territory was an abandoned world. God rules not only the earth, but also other worlds and helps different creatures. But when monsters become strong, they can destroy entire species of creatures. Only monsters remain. Heaven abandons this world. It becomes abandoned. The connection with heaven is broken. Therefore, Erta cannot communicate with other angels. But it was just a dungeon on earth. How could it become an abandoned world? Without letting her finish her thought, John grabbed Erta and ran, and next to him a blow fell. Something with a scythe, bony hands, and a cloak appeared before them. The face was not visible. It turned out to be an unregistered monster. It was formed as a result of monsters eating each other, mutating and evolving. You have to be careful because no one knew how he would behave. He was a very strong monster, but John decided that he could overcome him. The monster's blows were directed not at John, but at Erta. Erta promised any rewards just so the guy wouldn't die in this fight. The fight began, and the monster kept talking about some recording. Since the hammer was broken, John was left with only a spear. The monster demanded that all the equipment be given to him. Erta warned that he has magic. You need to be careful. John jumped up to deliver a powerful blow, and he unleashed all his power on the monster. But even though the blow was critical, it was not very strong. It was all about the difference in the opponent's levels. The monster was only slightly wounded, but that was a miracle considering its power. John and the monster were striking each other. The guy tried to strike with a spear, and although he was weaker than the monster, the latter was amazed by his strength. He wanted to get his records to gain knowledge, and they began to whirl in battle again, attacking and defending. Suddenly, the monster caused an explosion. John's armor was damaged. If he loses his armor, he can admit defeat. The monster put the power of mana into his attacks. That's why they were so incredibly strong. John didn't have mana, so he couldn't respond on equal terms. But he struck again, and then he froze in surprise. Spikes began to grow from the monster's face. They were wide, long, and incredibly sharp. One spike pierced John's shoulder. The boy screamed in unbearable pain. The wound immediately turned black. This indicated the introduction of a poison to which resistance did not apply. Erta decided to fly away from here so that the monster would stop following her. As she flew away, she asked for only one thing, that he would not die. John scored a critical hit. His hand was getting worse and worse. He couldn't feel it anymore. But the guy wasn't going to back down. He put on his mask and continued the fight. Meanwhile, Erta was flying towards the exit, which was not there. Glenn and Yuna stood nearby, unable to understand why the exit spell wasn't working. Unapeta's guardian angel was with them, and then they saw Erta, who fell towards them from the air. She only needed one thing, for the angel Peta to repay the debt. At the scene of the duel, John was losing ground. His mask was half broken. But the monster was surprised that this warrior had not fallen yet. The guy did not lose his good mood, even in such a hopeless situation. He didn't plan to die just 2 months after humans returned to Earth. But at that very moment he fell, struck down by the blow. He could not move, and the monster was already preparing to deliver the fatal blow. John saw a flash of Erta asking him not to die. Unearthly beauty Yuna, parents at a family dinner, and of course Lita. There was still a lot the boy hadn't done. He couldn't die. The monster dealt the decisive blow, but he missed. The place where John lay was empty. The Reaper couldn't understand how the warrior dodged the blow, and then Yuna, Glenn, and the angels appeared before them, illuminating everything with a bright light. John realized that the omen had come true. The boy's wound no longer looked black. He could lean on his wounded arm. And then it began to tighten completely. The healing power worked. Now he could move and continue the fight. So the boy took up his spear again. He expressed confidence and fortitude. John admitted that he owed his life to the appearance of angels and warriors. Now everyone had to join the fight. Glenn prepared for the attack, holding his shield in front of him, and Yuna cast a blessing spell on him, and this sent the monster on a long flight through the air. No one understood how one could fight against such a strong monster. Erta watched as Yuna built up her defenses and didn't understand who she was or where she got such abilities from. John asked Glenn to confront the monster alone for a while so he could prepare. Glenn reluctantly agreed, hoping for Yuna's help. He entered the battle, and Yuna showered blessings, creating protection. Yuna's guardian angel was in a panic that her ward might die. Glenn took the hit, but he didn't know if it was doing any good or what John was trying to come up with. Trolls appeared in the distance, and next to them was John waving a spear. Peta was amazed that at such a crucial moment he decided to hunt trolls. But the guy needed to kill 3 more to get a second profession. Then he could level up and recover. John received the status of a novice reaper and bonuses for this achievement. His stamina was restored. Now he could continue the fight. It took another 10 seconds for full recovery. At this time, the monster wounded Glenn in the arm. His armor was damaged. The monster considered this warrior a weakling, and Yuna prayed to all the gods that he would stay alive. The guy took a strong blow right to the chest, and he fell on his back, exhausted. This really scared Yuna. She held Glenn's body in her lap as the monster raised its hand to take their lives. With the last of her strength, Yuna built a defense around herself and Glenn. The monster's blow missed its target. The defense worked. He returned back, causing damage to the monster itself. Erta was amazed by Yuna's abilities. The monster was immobilized. There was a need to hurry so that Glenn could escape to a safe place, but they didn't make it. The Reaper began to come to his senses. However, at that moment a proposal was made to create a team. Lying on the ground, Glenn couldn't understand who had joined them. It was John who formed a team with them and returned to the battlefield. The monster regained his strength and was once again ready to kill everyone. Glenn's mission is complete. Now it's time for John to take on the enemy. Our hero ran confidently and quickly with a spear in his hand. Glenn lay on the ground and did not think that his strength was so weak. Before, he considered himself a strong warrior. The Reaper monster's anger reached its peak. He didn't even realize that John was already next to him. It was time to activate superhuman strength. John's body became so strong that it tore apart the armor. The Reaper looked at him, amazed by this. The spear's impact was accompanied by a bright blue light. It pierced the monster through and through, and it was a truly powerful critical killing blow. At that moment, the monster's hood fell off. John saw a girl lying on the ground in front of him. A tear rolled down her eye. She thanked him for deliverance. That was the last thing she said. John has now reached level 55. For freeing himself from the girl's curse, the warrior received a huge amount of experience. His teammates, who had also gained experience and recovered, were already rushing to the guy. They were as shocked as John when they realized that the monster was a man. And John was already taking out his knife to finish with the body as usual. But Erta stopped him. This time there was a human corpse in front of him. Before John could get close to the body, it turned to ashes. There was nothing left on the ground where the dead woman had recently lain. And then Erta realized that the Reaper was a destroyer. This is the one who ate the mana stones from the monster and was himself consumed by the monster. But John still had the stone, armor, and weapons of this creature. The exit from the dungeon reappeared, and the angel's abilities returned. But there were still many questions about this dungeon. Where did the third-class destroyer come from? Why did an abandoned world end up here? It was not clear what was happening to the Earth. Only one thing is clear, John won again. Glenn thanked our hero for saving him, and although they fought together, John intended to take the stone and the trophies for himself. Glenn didn't mind, but in return the guys asked the guy for his phone number, and again they were refused. Yuna didn't understand how she, such an attractive girl, was rejected again. Then Yuna began to beg him to at least say his name. John couldn't resist and gave his name. Glenn stood to the side and was surprised at how the girl spoke decisively to the guy, and he brushed her off. He realized that they were both unique creatures that were difficult for ordinary people to figure out. Finally, everyone got out of the dungeon, and before them appeared an angel in armor. She was of enormous size. Erta had to report what happened. After Eartha reported, the High Angel spoke of a reward for John for saving Eartha. Erta herself had to fly temporarily to heaven, and the entrance to the dungeon was sealed by heavenly forces. John didn't understand whether this dungeon was created by accident or someone did it on purpose and for what purpose. The monster girl with tears appeared before his eyes again. Since Earth was a world with unforeseen factors, even more angels were sent to control it. And the Supreme Angel also conveyed greetings from Lita, who missed John. This made the guy very happy. He wanted to know more about her, but the angel had already soared into the sky, blessing our hero. Yuna and Glenn returned home. A car met them at the airport, and in it was none other than Kat. It was on her orders that the boys were looking for scorpion venom. On the way from the airport, Yuna told them about their adventures and the guy with the spear. Kat realized who exactly they were talking about, but she didn't show that she knew him. Thanks to Glenn and Yuna, the Empress was able to obtain a second profession. John also returned home, but there was no one in the apartment. A note from my mother said that she went to another world for groceries. The first thing the guy did was take a shower, and then he went to the workshop to work with the trophies he had obtained. There was a mountain of meat that needed to be dealt with so that it wouldn't spoil, and then he got the idea to feed the meat to the eternal flame. He pulled cooked steaks out of the fire and earned points. Meanwhile, in heaven, a meeting was taking place about the incident in the dungeon. Erta sat sad and worried. They discussed the murdered girl who was turned into a monster. The angels could not understand how an abandoned world appeared on Earth. If John had not defeated the monster in the dungeon, the angels Earth and Pate would have died, and the entire Earth would have become an abandoned world. The heavenly angels could not understand how, just 2 months after the disaster began, a man could defeat a third-class monster. Some even considered John suspicious and the instigator of what happened. And then Lita couldn't stand it any longer. She started defending the guy with all her might. She was supported by Erta, who did not notice any suspicious moments during the time she was with him. But some angels were still not completely convinced. There will be more angels on Earth, and people who have shown extraordinary abilities will be rewarded. It is important to keep an eye on the Earth so that the abandoned world does not reconnect with it. After the meeting, the High Angel detained Lita, Erta, and Peta. He wanted to discuss the reward that should be given to John for saving and killing the monster. The High Angel wanted to give the greatest reward possible. He was kind to John and believed that he could get to the root of the problems on Earth. And John continued to work in the workshop until late at night. He even missed his mother's dinner with fresh produce from another world. He finally finished and reinforced his broken bumper with a metal heart. He also wanted to develop a long-range weapon that could be used without mana control. He discarded the idea of a bow and a gun, and he settled on a spear thrower. Thanks to the hook at the end, the spear can fly longer distances and hit the target with greater force. Moreover, John is a spearman. Inspired, he decided to start working right away. John laid out the trophies he had obtained from the dungeon in front of him. The robe had a stealth option, meaning that John could use it to improve his stealth. The Reaper's scythe had no less cool characteristics. The guy decided to melt it into a spear. When he put it into the fire, the flames began to behave strangely. The fire grew and then changed color to dark red. And a moment later, the monster from the dungeon appeared before John in his workshop. The guy didn't understand what was happening, but he grabbed the spear. And then a mana stone fell onto the workshop floor, and the monster disappeared. As soon as the ghost evaporated, the scythe began to melt. At this time, Erta appeared in the workshop together with Lita. They watched the boy work, who was so focused that he didn't notice the angels. He created a perfect legendary rank spear. But John wasn't satisfied with the work. The spear was missing something. He needed to use a mana stone to run it through crafting, and then he saw Lita. The guy thought he had overdone it, and it was a vision. But the angel really did return. Erta stood alone to the side, but John greeted her too. When the initial joy of the meeting had passed, the angels and John sat at the table and drank tea. There were serious matters to discuss. Heaven sent many angels to sort out the anomaly. Even they don't know what exactly happened and how to fix it. You have to be on guard because heaven knows if the incident will happen again. Now John was the helper of heaven. especially after he saved Eartha. It was time to get a reward for his efforts. First of all, the guy was given a shoulder bag with magical properties, and the second gift was supposed to be given by Lita. The guy froze in anticipation of his second award. Lita kept up the intrigue, making the guy blush and get nervous. And finally, he found out. Now he became the angel's partner. This meant that heaven would always help John, and Lita will always be there. But instead of joy, John became sad. He didn't need it anymore. Lita didn't expect this turn of events. Was she useless to John? But at that very moment, he beamed. It was a joke. All that was left was to activate this subclass, which the guy did immediately. Along with the partnership, John received a skill set, support, and angelic blessings. The more time the boy spends near angels, the stronger the skill will become. It was a kind of angelic team. But for John, the main thing was that in battles, his characteristics would increase by 30%. It was the best gift. And our hero began to hug and thank the angels. The skill of supporting angels can be trained by interacting with them. The more interaction, the more active the skill. Lita and Eartha were happy to cooperate with John, and he, in turn, is glad that his angels will be nearby. But the guy immediately went back to work to finish his products. For him, work came first. He didn't even listen to Lita's indignation. He looked at his spear. He wanted it to reveal all of the Reaper's skills. Lita was shocked that John had the ability to craft mana, and so the spear was completed. It was sharp with a high striking force. In short legendary, the spear's stats included a note about an extinct dragon, and John couldn't figure out what that had to do with it. This was the original weapon option, and the world of the monster girl fell precisely because of the dragons. The desire to kill them was embedded in the weapon. It turns out that John achieved the potential power of the spear by doing a great job of crafting mana. Lita warned that if John encountered a dragon, he should run away immediately, but John was sure that the collision would happen sooner or later, and Erda supported him in this. As always, John panicked at first, but he can do everything. He still has time before this meeting.